Issei Hyoudou had always believed that the worst night of his life would also be the last. He remembered the park, the falling leaves turning to razors of light, and the girl who had smiled at him like an angel before pulling a spear of pure black energy from the air. He remembered the cold. He remembered thinking, in the strange calm that sometimes visits people in mortal danger, that he had never even told his parents he loved them enough. He should have died there. Instead, he woke up in his own bed the next morning, soaked in sweat, his chest aching in a place no doctor would ever find a wound. There was no Rias Gremory waiting to explain that he had been resurrected as a devil. There was no crimson magic circle burned into his bedroom floor. There was only Issei, alone, staring at his ceiling and trying to convince himself that Yuma Amano and the things she had become were nothing more than a nightmare born from too much junk food and too little sleep. He almost managed it. For 3 days he almost managed it. Then his left hand began to burn. It was a strange kind of burning, not painful exactly, more like the sensation of a limb that had fallen asleep and was now trying, urgently, to wake up. It came in pulses, worse at night, worse when he was afraid, worse when his heart pounded too hard climbing the stairs to his classroom. He wrapped his hand in a bandage so his mother would not ask questions, and he told himself it would pass. It did not pass. It got worse. By the end of the second week, Issei had stopped sleeping properly. He would lie awake listening to a voice that was not quite a voice, more like a pressure behind his thoughts, patient and enormous, waiting for something he did not understand. He began to suspect, in the quiet terror of 3 a.m, that whatever had almost killed him in that park had not finished with him. It had only postponed. He never went looking for answers. The Occult Research Club existed at Ko Academy, a handful of the most beautiful and unapproachable students in the school, but Issei had no reason to associate his ordinary, unremarkable self with people who felt, when he passed them in the hallway, like standing too close to a bonfire. He did not know their secret. He only knew, on some animal level, to stay away from the heat. So when the pressure in his hand and the voice in his skull finally led him somewhere, it did not lead him toward Rias Gremory's clubroom. It led him in the opposite direction entirely, to the crumbling east wing of the school that everyone called the old building, and past it, to a smaller structure behind the old building that officially did not exist on any campus map at all. The students called it the annex, when they mentioned it, which was rare. It had burned, decades ago, in a fire that the school's official history described in exactly 1 sentence, and it had never been rebuilt. Ivy had swallowed half of it. The windows that remained were fogged with grime so thick they looked like blind eyes. Nobody went there. Nobody wanted to. Issei stood at the edge of the tree line behind the old building on a gray Tuesday afternoon, skipping the last period of the day for the first time in his life, and stared at the annex's collapsed east wall, and felt his left hand throb in time with his heartbeat, pulling him forward like a hook set in his palm. "This is insane," he muttered to the empty courtyard. "This is actually insane. I should go home. I should go home and lie down and forget I ever came out here." He did not go home. He crossed the dead grass, climbed through a gap in a rusted fence that had clearly been cut open by someone else long before he arrived, and pushed through a door that had no business opening as easily as it did, given how the frame around it had rotted and sagged. Inside, the air was cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of a room that had not been breathed in for a very long time. Dust hung suspended in the pale light leaking through the grimy windows, and Issei's footsteps on the warped floorboards sounded impossibly loud, each one swallowed by a silence so total it felt like the building itself was holding its breath to listen. He should have turned back then. Every rational part of him screamed that he should turn back. But the pull in his hand had become a compulsion, an ache that promised relief only if he kept walking, and so he kept walking, deeper into a building that history had tried very hard to forget. He found the heart of the annex in what must once have been an assembly hall, a long room with a vaulted ceiling and the blackened remains of support beams reaching up like the ribs of some huge, dead animal. In the center of the room, carved into the floor itself, was a circle. Not a magic circle in the way he might have imagined one, all elegant lines and glowing script. This one looked older than that, cruder, gouged directly into the stone beneath the rotted floorboards as if someone had cut through the wood just to reach it. Strange symbols ringed its edge, symbols that made Issei's eyes water faintly when he tried to look at them directly. At the center of the circle stood a shape. It took him a long moment to understand that it was a person, or had been, once. It was carved from the same dark stone as the circle, or perhaps grown from it, a tall figure wrapped in tattered strips of something that might have been armor or might have been robes, its head bowed, its hands folded before it as if in prayer, or in waiting. Chains of rusted iron and something else, something that caught the light strangely and was clearly not iron at all, wound around its wrists and ankles, anchoring it to the floor. The moment Issei's eyes fell on the statue, the pressure in his hand became a scream. A crimson light burst from the back of his left hand, searing through his sleeve, and he cried out and staggered, clutching his wrist as if he could physically hold the light in. It did not care about his hand. It poured out of him and across the room in a wave, and where it touched the circle, the ancient symbols flared to answering life, one by one, a slow chain reaction of dim red fire racing around the ring until it reached the statue's feet. Boosted gear. The voice was not in his ears. It was in the marrow of his bones, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and Issei felt his knees buckle even as some part of him recognized, with a lurch of vertigo, that this was the voice that had been haunting his sleepless nights for 2 weeks. What? Issei managed. What is happening? What is that thing? What is happening to my hand? Partner. You have found what was waiting. The statue's bowed head lifted. Issei did not run, though every instinct told him to. He could not have said afterward why he stayed rooted to that spot, watching as cracks of red light spread across the statue's stone surface like veins catching fire. Watching as the ancient chains groaned and strained and began, slowly, impossibly, to glow white-hot and crumble into rust and ash. He only knew that the pull in his hand had become something else now, something that felt less like being dragged and more like being recognized, and some deep and frightened part of him understood that whatever was waking up in that circle had been waiting, specifically, for him. The statue's stone shell shattered outward in a silent detonation of red light, and Issei threw his arm up against the glare, and when he lowered it again, the shape standing in the center of the circle was no longer stone. It was breathing. The figure that stood where the statue had been was tall, taller than Issei by a full head, wrapped in armor the color of old iron that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. Its face, when it turned toward him, was not quite human and not quite anything else, sharp and ancient and marked with faint lines like the grain of old wood. Its eyes were a deep, banked red, the color of embers that had been smoldering for a very long time and had just remembered how to burn. Issei's back hit the wall behind him before he realized he had moved. Okay, he said, his voice cracking. Okay, I am dreaming, this is a dream, I fell asleep in class and this is a dream. You are not dreaming. The figure's voice was low and rough, like stone grinding on stone, though there was something almost gentle beneath the roughness, the patience of something that had learned, over a very long time, not to be startled by fear. Though I would forgive you the thought. Few who see me for the first time believe their own eyes. What are you? I have been called many things. The figure lowered itself, not quite kneeling, more settling its weight the way something enormous and tired might settle after standing too long. In the years before this building burned, the students who studied here called me the warden. Before that, older names in older tongues, most of which have crumbled from the world along with the people who spoke them. I do not mind which name you use. I have not needed one in a long time. Issei's hand had stopped burning. In its place was a strange, settled warmth, as if something that had been straining against a locked door for 2 weeks had finally been let inside. He looked down at his palm and found, faintly visible beneath the skin, the outline of a crimson gem, pulsing gently in time with his own heartbeat. He is telling the truth, partner. Though he is choosing his words carefully. He always did. The voice in Issei's head rumbled again, and this time it was not entirely separate from him. He felt it settle somewhere behind his sternum, a second presence sharing the same small space. You, Issei said slowly, looking at his hand rather than the towering figure in front of him, because it was somehow easier. You're the thing that's been talking to me. In my sleep. Drag. The Red Dragon Emperor, if titles matter to you, though I have found most people prefer simply to survive our first conversation before worrying about names. A dragon, Issei repeated faintly. There's a dragon in my hand. Not entirely accurate, but close enough for a first day. The warden's ember eyes studied him with an intensity that made Issei feel, absurdly, as though he were being weighed on some enormous, invisible scale. The boosted gear chose you, boy. That is no small thing. It is also no accident that it led you here, to me, rather than to any of the louder, more visible powers this town has to offer. What do you mean, led me here? I didn't choose to come here. My hand just kept pulling. Issei stopped, and something cold went through him. Wait. Did you do that? Did you make my hand hurt so I'd come find you? I have been sealed in this circle for longer than your nation has had its current name, the warden said, and for the first time something like weariness crept into its rough voice. I did not reach out to you, child. I could not. But the sacred gear that has bound itself to your soul recognized what slept here, and it called to it, the way calls always to like. That is not manipulation. That is simply what you are, meeting what I am. Issei slid slowly down the wall until he was sitting on the cold floorboards, because his legs had stopped being reliable sometime in the last several minutes. I don't understand any of this, he admitted. 2 weeks ago I was a totally normal high school student. I had a totally normal, kind of pathetic life. I wanted a girlfriend and I wanted to pass my math test, and now there's a dragon in my hand and a giant armored ghost telling me I got chosen for something. You were never as normal as you believed, the warden said, not unkindly. The girl in the park who nearly killed you was a fallen angel. She sensed something in you even then, something worth killing before it could grow. You survived that encounter not through luck, but because the seed of your sacred gear had already taken root deeply enough to keep your soul from tearing free of your body. That is rare. That is, in fact, the reason I am willing to speak with you at all. Rare like special, or rare like I'm about to find out there's a downside. Something that might have been amusement flickered across the warden's ancient face. Both, usually, in my experience. Let me tell you what this place is, and then you may decide for yourself whether you wish to walk back out that door and forget you ever found it. I will not stop you either way. Issei said nothing, which the warden seemed to take as permission. Long before this school existed, this land was a crossing point, a place where the boundary between the human world and the deeper world grew thin. Such places attract things that do not belong fully to either side. Spirits without vessels. Familiars abandoned by masters long dead. Fragments of old magic that never found a purpose and never faded away. Over centuries, this annex became something like a shelter for such things, a place where they could rest without being hunted, without being consumed by devils or angels or the countless other powers that treat the unaffiliated as prey. And you were guarding it, Issei said slowly. That's what a warden does. I was guarding it, the warden agreed. Until the fire. What happened? The ember eyes dimmed slightly, and for the first time Issei saw something that looked almost like old grief cross that ancient, stony face. Devils came, seeking to claim what rested here as spoils, unclaimed power ready for the taking. I refused them. There was a battle. The building burned, and in the chaos, I was bound, sealed into stone by a right that should have killed me rather than merely silencing me. Whether that was mercy or a mistake on the part of whoever cast it, I have never been certain. I have slept since, and the things I once protected have slept with me, scattered and hidden through this building, waiting for a warden who would never wake to save them. Issei looked around the ruined assembly hall with new eyes, at the collapsed beams and the ash-stained walls, and felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest that was not quite fear anymore. They're still here, he said. Whatever you were protecting. They're still trapped in this building. They are. The warden rose fully to its feet, and even that simple motion carried a terrible, patient weight, like a mountain deciding to stand. And I can no longer protect them alone. The right that sealed me broke the moment your sacred gear's power touched this circle, but it broke unevenly. I am free, but I am weak, a fraction of what I once was, tethered now to whoever woke me. That is how the old bond works, boy, whether either of us wanted it or not. You woke the warden. That makes you the one the warden now serves, and protects, and answers to. Wait, what? Issei scrambled back to his feet. I don't want to be in charge of a dragon ghost guy who protects a haunted building. I don't know how to protect anything. I can barely protect my own bike from getting stolen. You did not ask for the boosted gear either, and yet it chose you. The warden's voice softened, just slightly, the roughness smoothing into something almost paternal. I am not asking you to be a warrior tonight, Issei Hyoudou. I am telling you what you have found, and what it will ask of you, if you choose to stay. There is no shame in walking away. Many would. But you won't, Drake rumbled from somewhere behind Issei's ribs, sounding, for the first time since Issei had woken to its voice, almost like it was smiling. I have shared a soul with cowards before, partner. You are not one of them. You are simply frightened, which is a very different thing. Issei stood very still in the ruined hall, looking at the towering figure who had just called itself his to command, feeling the warmth of the gem beneath his skin, and thought about Yuma Amano's smile turning into something else in the dark. He thought about 2 weeks of sleepless nights and a voice he had been too afraid to answer. He thought about walking home right now and pretending none of this had ever happened, and going back to being ordinary, and small, and safe. He thought about the trapped things scattered through the walls around him, waiting for a warden who would never wake. Okay, he said finally, and his voice, to his own surprise, did not shake. Okay. Tell me what I have to do. The bond, the warden explained, was not something that could be undone by wishing it away. It had settled into place the instant the seal broke, a quiet thread stretched between Issei's chest and the ancient guardian now standing before him, and severing it, the warden said, would likely kill them both. Issei decided, after a moment of feeling faintly sick, that he would rather not test that theory. So what does it actually mean? Issei asked, pacing a slow, nervous circle around the edge of the stone ring, this bond thing. Am I your boss now? Are you my bodyguard? What is the actual arrangement here? Neither, entirely, and both, partially. The warden watched him pace with the patient stillness of something that had spent centuries learning not to waste motion. In the old tongue, the word is closer to steward. I protect what is under my care, and you are now the one who decides what falls under that care. I will not act against your wishes, save to keep you from dying through simple recklessness. Beyond that, the choices are yours. I have had many warden's charges before you, in ages past, when the bond passed from teacher to student in a line older than this school. You are the first in a very long time. Great, Issei muttered. No pressure. There is pressure, the warden said, with the faint dry humor of something that had clearly picked up a sense of irony somewhere across the centuries. I would not lie to you and say otherwise. But you need not carry it alone tonight. It was Drake, rumbling patiently from within Issei's own chest, who finally cut through the spiraling questions with something practical. Partner. If you intend to stay, and I believe you do, then the wisest use of tonight is not more talk. It is to see what you have inherited. Ask the warden to show you the others. The others, Issei repeated. He looked at the warden. The things you said were trapped here. Can you actually find them? I can sense them, faintly, the way one senses a heartbeat through a wall. The warden turned, ember eyes sweeping across the ruined hall as if reading something written in the dust and ash that Issei could not see. The bond has restored a fraction of my strength, though far from what I once commanded. It is enough, I believe, to find the nearest of them. The warden led him deeper into the annex, through a collapsed archway and down a narrow stone stairwell that Issei was fairly certain should not have survived a fire, into a lower level that felt, if anything, older than the hall above. The air here was colder still, and thick with a stillness that pressed against Issei's ears like the silence before a held breath finally breaks. At the end of a long, narrow corridor lined with alcoves too dark to see into, the warden stopped before a wall of loose stone and rubble, half collapsed inward from whatever had happened decades ago. Here, the warden said quietly. Hear what? It's just a wall. Listen, the warden said. Not with your ears. Issei felt foolish standing in a collapsed basement being told to listen with something other than his ears. But the gem in his hand pulsed warmly again, an insistent little heartbeat, and against his better judgment he closed his eyes and tried. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, like a sound heard through deep water, he became aware of something small and frightened, curled tight around itself in the dark, a presence so faded and thin it barely registered as anything at all. It felt, more than anything, like loneliness given the shape of a heartbeat. His eyes snapped open. There's something in there. Something scared. Yes. The warden knelt beside the rubble and, with a strength that seemed almost gentle for something so large, began carefully shifting stones aside, one at a time, as though afraid of what carelessness might do to whatever waited beneath. A familiar, I believe, judging by the faintness of the presence. Likely bound here by a master who died, or fled, or simply forgot, long before the fire ever came. Abandoned familiars fade slowly, unable to die and unable to truly live, until eventually there is little left of them but the fear of being forgotten entirely. Issei knelt to help, pulling stones aside with hands that had never done anything more physically demanding than carrying his school bag, and did not complain once about the effort. Something about the small, frightened presence on the other side of that wall made complaining feel unthinkable. It took the better part of an hour to clear enough of the rubble to reveal a narrow gap, and through it, curled in the deepest corner of a space no larger than a closet, was a shape. It looked, at first glance, like a fox, small and thin, its fur a dull, ashen gray rather than any natural color, its edges faintly translucent in the dim light so that the stone wall behind it was visible in patches through its own body. It lifted its head at the sound of the shifting rubble and stared at them both with wide, hollow eyes that had clearly not expected, after however many years of silence, to see anyone at all. It did not run. It seemed, Issei thought with an ache he had not expected to feel, too tired and too faded to run. Hey, Issei said softly, crouching lower, trying to make himself as small and as unthreatening as possible. Hey, it's okay. We're not going to hurt you. The fox's ears flattened, and it pressed itself further into the corner, and Issei felt the ache in his chest sharpen into something closer to anger, a slow, quiet fury at whoever had left this small, faded thing alone in the dark for so many years that it had forgotten what kindness looked like. Careful, partner, Drake murmured. Fear this deep does not vanish because you wish it to. But your intentions are true, and creatures like this one can sense truth, even faded as it is. Let it come to you if it will. Issei sat down slowly on the cold stone floor, cross-legged, well back from the gap in the wall, and did not reach for the fox at all. He simply waited, the way he might have waited out a stray cat too skittish to approach, and let the silence stretch, and after a long, long moment, the fox's hollow eyes shifted from him to the gem glowing faintly in his open palm. Something in its posture changed. The flattened ears lifted, just slightly. It took one small, trembling step out of the corner, then another, and Issei held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, as the small translucent creature crossed the gap between them and, with a hesitance that broke his heart a little, pressed its faded nose against his outstretched hand. Warmth spread from the gem the instant contact was made, a warmth that was not Issei's own, and the fox's thin body seemed to solidify slightly where it touched him, the stone wall behind it no longer quite visible through its fur. There, the warden said quietly, and Issei looked up to see something that might have been the ghost of a smile on that ancient, stony face. That is the bond forming, boy. That is what it means to be a steward. It does not ask that you be powerful. It asks only that you be trusted. Issei looked down at the small fox now curled against his palm, no longer trembling, no longer hollow-eyed, and felt, for the first time since a fallen angel had nearly ended his life in a quiet park, something that was not quite fear at all. Okay, he said quietly, mostly to himself. Okay. I think I get it now. There were more, the warden told him, scattered through the ruined halls and buried chambers of the annex, some faded nearly to nothing, some stronger, some that might resist rather than welcome a stranger into their long solitude. It would take time, the warden warned, and patience, and more of exactly the kind of quiet, deliberate kindness Issei had just shown without needing to be told how. Issei looked around at the ruined building that history had tried to erase, at the ancient guardian now bound to his fate, and at the small, faded fox already asleep against his palm as though it had not slept safely in decades, and made a decision that would have surprised the boy he had been 3 weeks earlier. He was not going home to forget any of this. He was going to come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and however many days it took, until every faded and forgotten thing sleeping in these broken walls had somewhere safe to finally rest. Living a double life, Issei discovered within his first week, was exhausting in ways he had never appreciated when he only had one ordinary life to manage. By day he was still Issei Hyoudou, unremarkable second year, forgettable in class and invisible to the girls he had once embarrassed himself trying to impress. By late afternoon, the moment the final bell rang, he became something else entirely, a boy who slipped behind the old building and through a rusted gap in a fence to spend his evenings clearing rubble in a ruined hall with a centuries-old guardian spirit, and a small, increasingly attached ghost fox that had taken to riding curled around his neck like a scarf. He named the fox Hikari, mostly because it seemed wrong for something to exist without a name for as long as it had, and because the moment he said it aloud, the fox's ears had perked in a way that felt unmistakably like approval. Hikari did not speak, not in words, but Issei was beginning to understand her moods well enough regardless, the low contented hum when she was pleased, the way she pressed closer to his throat when something in the annex's shadows made her uneasy. "You're getting attached," the warden observed on the 5th evening, watching Issei carefully untangle Hikari's tail from where it had wrapped itself around his book bag strap. "That is not a criticism. It is simply an observation." "I don't really know how not to," Issei admitted. She was just sitting there in the dark for who knows how long. Somebody has to be attached to her. "Many wardens across many centuries would agree with you," the warden said. "It is, in fact, the entire principle on which this place was built. But I would be remiss if I did not warn you that not everything sleeping in these walls will be as gentle as Hikari. Some of what was sheltered here came to this place already wounded, already frightened into something sharper than fear. You should be prepared for that." Issei did not have to wait long to understand what the warden meant. It happened on the 7th evening, when the two of them ventured into a part of the annex neither had yet explored, a wing on the building's western side where the fire damage was worst. Entire sections of ceiling collapsed into the rooms below, forcing Issei to pick his way carefully over debris while the warden moved ahead of him with the unhurried confidence of something that did not fear falling stone the way a 15-year-old boy did. They found the second presence in what had once been a small chapel, judging by the remains of a stone altar still standing, miraculously, near a wall that had otherwise crumbled entirely. Unlike Hikari's faint, frightened hum, this presence hit Issei the moment he stepped through the doorway like a physical wave, sharp and hostile and radiating a wariness so intense it felt, for a moment, like walking into a wall of static. "Whoa," Issei said, stumbling back a step. Hikari, curled around his neck, went rigid and let out a thin, warning hiss he had never heard from her before. "Okay, that's different. This one has been alone longer, and more violently disturbed, than the fox," Drake rumbled, and something in the dragon's tone had shifted, gone careful in a way Issei had not heard from him before. "Tread with more caution, partner. Fear that has curdled into hostility does not respond the way simple fear does." The warden held up a hand, motioning Issei to stay near the doorway, and step further into the ruined chapel alone. "I mean no harm," the warden said, his rough voice pitched low, almost gentle. "I am the warden of this place," returned. "I have brought no one who wishes to hunt you." For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, from the shadows behind the broken altar, something moved. It emerged slowly, and Issei's first impression was that it looked less like an animal and more like a suit of armor that had somehow become alive, tall and angular, its surface a patchwork of blackened, fire-scarred plate that might once have been ornate, and was now simply scorched and broken in places, held together by what looked like sinew rather than any visible joints. Where a face should have been there was only a narrow slit of dim, guttering light, the same color, Issei realized with a chill, as the ember eyes of the warden himself, though far dimmer, far more unstable. "A guardian construct," the warden said quietly, not taking his eyes off the armored shape. "Bound to protect this chapel, once. It is badly damaged, and it has clearly spent this entire time believing itself still under attack." The construct's slitted eye flared brighter, and it raised one broken, gauntlet arm, and even in its damaged state Issei could feel, in the pit of his stomach, that whatever strength remained in that ancient guardian was not something he wanted aimed at him. Hey, Issei said before he could think better of it, stepping half in front of the warden despite every rational instinct telling him that was a spectacularly bad idea. Hey, it's okay. Nobody's attacking. The fire's over. It's been over for a really long time. The construct's arm did not lower. If anything, the light in its slitted eye flared hotter, and Issei felt Hikari's small body tremble against his neck, and somewhere behind his ribs he felt Drake's presence coil tighter, a readiness that had nothing to do with words. Partner, if it moves to strike, I will not be able to stop you from being hurt without drawing on power that will announce our presence to every corner of this town. Choose carefully. Issei's heart hammered against his ribs, and every instinct screamed at him to step back, to let the warden handle this, to be the frightened ordinary boy he had been 3 weeks ago and let someone stronger take the risk instead. But he thought of Hikari curled in the dark for years, waiting for someone who never came, and he thought of this construct standing guard over a burned chapel decade after decade, still believing, in whatever passed for its mind, that the battle had never ended. He did not step back. Instead, slowly, deliberately, he raised his own hand, the one marked faintly with the crimson gem beneath his skin, and held it out, palm open, the way he had for Hikari, and let the light of it be the only thing he offered. The fire's over, he said again, quieter this time. You don't have to keep fighting it. You did your job. You protected this place. It's okay to stop now. The construct went very still. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened at all, the only sound the faint sputtering of its unstable eye and the ragged sound of Issei's own breathing. Then, slowly, the raised gauntlet arm began, jerkily, to lower, the scorched plates grinding against each other with a sound like distant thunder, until the construct stood simply facing him, no longer raised in threat, its dim eye fixed unblinking on the light glowing in Issei's outstretched hand. There, the warden murmured, and Issei could hear, even in that single word, something like relief. There it is. It did not approach the way Hikari had. It did not curl trustingly against his palm. But it lowered its head, just slightly, in a motion that felt, unmistakably, like the beginning of something, and Issei understood, standing in that ruined chapel with his heart still pounding, that not every bond in this place would come easily, and that he would need to learn patience far deeper than anything he had ever needed before. He realized with a strange, quiet certainty, more than willing to learn it. 3 weeks after Issei first crossed the dead grass behind the old building, the annex had begun, slowly and unevenly, to feel less like a ruin and more like a place that remembered how to be lived in. The assembly hall was still scorched and broken, the roof still open to the sky in places, but Issei had spent his allowance on a second-hand broom and a set of work gloves, and the worst of the ash had finally been swept from the floor where the stone circle sat. Hikari had claimed a nest of old blankets in the corner nearest the hearth, dragged there over several evenings from a supply closet at home that Issei's mother had assumed, with some confusion, was being emptied by moths. The armored construct, who still had no name and did not seem to want one yet, had taken up a silent, watchful post near the chapel doorway, and though it had not spoken a single word in 3 weeks, it had begun, almost imperceptibly, to relax its stance whenever Issei entered the building. There had been 4 more presences found since the construct, each one different, each one requiring its own particular patience. A small cluster of will-o'-the-wisps that had scattered into the eaves and taken nearly a week of quiet coaxing to draw back together. A dour, ancient garden spirit bound to the roots of the one tree in the courtyard that had somehow survived the fire, who spoke perhaps one sentence a night and had made it clear, in that one sentence, that trust would be earned slowly or not at all. Issei found he did not mind the slowness. There was something steadying about it, after the chaos of nearly dying in a park 3 weeks ago, to have a project that asked only for patience rather than violence. You have changed since the night I woke, the warden observed one evening, watching Issei carefully reattach a hinge on a supply closet door he had scavenged from somewhere near the school's maintenance shed. I do not say that as criticism. Good, because I don't think I could handle criticism on top of everything else. Issei wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. Is it bad? The changing? No. The warden's rough voice carried something that might have been approval. It is, in fact, precisely the sort of change I hoped to see, though I confess I did not expect it this quickly. You have begun to think less like a boy who stumbled into responsibility, and more like a steward who has chosen it. Issei considered that while he tightened the last screw. It was true, he supposed, though he had not noticed the shift happening in real time. 3 weeks ago he had been consumed by fear, by the aftershock of nearly dying, by a voice in his head he did not understand and a burning in his hand he could not explain. Now his evenings were built around small, quiet victories, a hinge fixed, a nest of blankets laid out, a frightened spirit coaxed one careful inch closer to trust. It was, he was beginning to realize, its own kind of strength, quieter than the fire that had briefly consumed the park that night, but no less real for its quietness. Power built slowly tends to hold its shape better than power seized quickly, Drake offered, in the low, contemplative rumble he used when he was in a rare talkative mood. I have shared bodies with wielders who wanted only the fire, partner, the boost, the strength, without ever wanting the responsibility that should accompany it. Those bonds tend to end poorly. Yours, I think, will not. You sound almost proud, Issei said, half teasing. I am cautiously optimistic. There is a difference. Ask me again in a year. Issei laughed, a real laugh, the first easy one he had managed in weeks, and did not notice, in that moment, the faint ripple that passed through the air around him, a ripple that had nothing to do with laughter at all. The warden noticed. The ancient guardian went suddenly, sharply still, ember eyes narrowing toward the ruined hall's broken ceiling, and Issei's laughter died in his throat at the change in posture alone. What? He started to ask. Quiet, the warden said, and there was an edge in that single word Issei had not heard before. Something felt that. Just now. When your dragon spoke and your gem answered. Felt what? Felt us? A resonance. The warden's gaze remained fixed upward, tracking something Issei could not see or sense at all. A brief, faint spike of draconic power, gone almost as soon as it appeared. It is possible it went unnoticed. It is also possible, and I would rather you prepare for this possibility than be blindsided by it, that it did not. Hikari, curled in her nest of blankets, had gone rigid, ears flattened, hackles raised along her thin spine, staring up at the same patch of broken ceiling with wide, wary eyes. There are others in this town who watch for exactly this sort of thing, the warden continued, lowering his gaze at last to meet Issei's own. Powerful ones. Devils chief among them, who make it their business to notice when something as significant as a Longinus-class sacred gear stirs within their territory. If what just happened reached far enough ears, boy, you should understand that this quiet, careful work of yours may not remain quiet for very much longer. Issei looked around the assembly hall, at Hikari's frightened eyes, at the faint shape of the armored construct visible through the far doorway, standing a little straighter than usual, at the stone circle at the center of the room where all of this had begun 3 weeks ago, and felt the easy warmth of the evening curdle, slowly, into something more watchful. How long do you think we have? He asked quietly. Before somebody comes looking? The warden did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his rough voice carried the particular weight of something ancient enough to have seen this exact moment unfold many times before, in many other lives, with many other boys who had not been ready for what came next. Less time than either of us would like, he said. I would suggest, Issei Hyoudou, that whatever peace you have built here in these last 3 weeks, you spend the coming days making certain it can withstand a visitor who does not knock before entering. Somewhere above the broken roof of the annex, unseen and unheard by anyone within, a faint crimson afterglow faded slowly from the evening sky, already noticed, already reported, already setting into motion the very thing the warden had just warned him to prepare for. Rias Gremory noticed the flicker on a Tuesday evening, sitting in the clubroom of the old school building with a cup of tea cooling in her hands and a stack of territory reports she had been putting off for a week. It was small, barely a ripple in the ambient magical pressure of the town she was sworn to watch over, gone almost before her senses had finished registering it. Under ordinary circumstances she might have dismissed it as nothing, a stray flare of some minor spirit settling an old grudge in the woods behind the school. These were not ordinary circumstances, because the flicker had carried, buried faintly within it, a signature she had not felt in this town in all her years stationed here. Draconic. Old. Enormous, even diminished as it clearly was, like catching a single note of a song played by a full orchestra somewhere behind a very thick wall. She set her tea down carefully. "Akino," she said, and her voice was quiet enough that the girl seated across from her, dark hair falling over one shoulder as she flipped through a ledger of club expenses, looked up immediately at the change in tone. "Did you feel that?" "I felt something." Akino Himajima's easy smile did not waver, but her eyes sharpened in the particular way they always did when something interesting crossed her path. "Very brief. Very faint." "You look like you felt considerably more than I did, Rias." "I felt a dragon," Rias said. The room went still. Issei Hyoudou, seated near the window with a wooden practice sword across his knees, looked up sharply. Kaneko Tuju, curled in an armchair with a bag of sweets balanced on the cushion beside her, stopped chewing entirely. "There have been no reports of a stray dragon entering this territory," Kiba said carefully. "Not through any of the usual channels. Sona would have told us." "I know." Rias rose from her seat and crossed to the tall window overlooking the darkening courtyard, arms folding as she stared out at the ordinary evening beyond the glass, students filing home, the last of the daylight bleeding orange across rooftops that hid, as they always did, far more than they showed. Which means either it slipped in undetected, which should be nearly impossible for something of that signature, or it did not come from outside our territory at all. "You think it was already here," Akino said slowly. "I think," Rias said, "that something has been asleep in this town for longer than any of us have been stationed here, and something just woke it up." She thought immediately, as she always did when unexplained power surfaced in her territory, of the sacred gears scattered unpredictably throughout the human population, most of them harmless, a handful of them extraordinary, and a very small number of them capable of the kind of resonance she had just felt ripple across the edge of her senses. There was a particular category of sacred gear, rare beyond rarity, that carried within it an echo of true dragon power. She had studied the old texts. She knew the names, even if she had never personally witnessed one awaken. "If it is what I suspect," she said, turning back to face her peerage, "then whoever carries it is either about to become an extremely valuable ally to this house, or an extremely dangerous complication for it, and I would very much rather it be the former before anyone else in this town notices and decides for us." "You want to find them first," Kaneko said in her flat, quiet way, though her golden eyes had sharpened with the same interest that had crossed Kiba's face a moment earlier. "I want to find them first," Rias agreed. Quietly. "Before word spreads to the fallen angels holding territory near the church, or worse, before it reaches ears in the underworld who would see a rogue dragon vessel as a prize to be seized rather than a person to be respected." Akino set the ledger aside entirely now, all pretense of routine business abandoned. "Do we have a location, at least? A general direction?" Rias closed her eyes briefly, reaching out again with the faint, careful edges of her own magical senses, chasing the memory of that fleeting signature back toward its source. It was difficult, fainter now than it had been in the moment, like trying to follow a scent that had mostly dissolved into the evening air. But there was something, a lingering trace, pulling steadily toward the school's western grounds. The old campus. Somewhere past the old building, I think. There isn't supposed to be anything back there worth noticing. Kiba's brow furrowed. The annex? Every head in the room turned toward him. "You know it?" Rias asked. "Only the stories," Kiba admitted. "It burned decades ago. Officially it was an accident, faulty wiring, something mundane like that. Unofficially, some of the older maintenance staff talk about it differently, when they think students aren't listening. There are rumors it was some kind of old shelter, before the fire. Something tied to the town's older history. Nobody's supposed to go near it. The gate's been locked for years." "Locked gates have never stopped anyone determined enough," Rias said, and something in her tone made it clear she was thinking less about hypothetical intruders and more about a specific, unknown boy who had apparently walked through one entirely unbothered. "If that is where the signature is coming from, then whoever carries this power either found their way there by extraordinary coincidence, or was drawn there by something already waiting inside." Either way, I want to know who they are before this goes any further. Tonight? Akino asked, already rising, the easy playfulness in her expression sharpening into something more focused. Rias considered it for a moment, weighing the pull of urgency against the risk of moving too quickly on ground she did not yet understand. A dragon signature, however faint, was not something to approach carelessly, and if it truly had come from somewhere sealed away for decades, there was no telling what else might be waiting alongside it. Not tonight, she decided finally. Tonight we watch, and we learn what we can from a distance. I would rather understand what we are walking into before I introduce myself to whoever is living inside a supposedly abandoned ruin with enough power to make my senses flare from across campus. She looked back out the window, toward the darkening tree line at the edge of the old campus, where somewhere beyond her sight a boy she had never met was, at that exact moment, kneeling in a ruined chapel coaxing a scarred and frightened guardian one careful inch closer to trust, entirely unaware that the very thing he had been quietly warned to prepare for had already begun. But soon, Rias added quietly. Very soon. Akino found the gap in the fence on the third night of watching. It was Kaneko who spotted the boy first, 2 nights earlier, crouched at the edge of the tree line in an ordinary school uniform with an ordinary backpack slung over one shoulder, moving with the careful, guilty posture of someone who knew perfectly well he was not supposed to be where he was going. She had almost dismissed him as nothing more than a curious student who would turn back the moment the ruined building's atmosphere unsettled him, the way it unsettled most people who wandered too close. He had not turned back. He had climbed through a rusted gap in the fence like he had done it a dozen times before, and vanished into the annex, and had not reappeared until nearly 2 hours later, considerably dirtier than when he had gone in. He's done this before, Kaneko reported flatly, back in the clubroom, a bag of chips crinkling in her lap as she recounted what she had seen. Not first time. Knows where the gap in the fence is without looking for it. A regular visitor to a burned, supposedly sealed ruin, Rias said slowly, turning the information over. That fits. Did you sense anything from him directly? Nothing loud. Kaneko frowned slightly, chewing on the thought as much as the chips. But something. Small hum, underneath. Like standing near a beehive from far away. That could be it, Akino murmured. A sacred gear at rest doesn't always announce itself. It only flares when it's actively used, or provoked. Rias had decided, after that report, that watching from a distance was no longer sufficient, and so on the third night she sent Akino herself, the most skilled among her peerage at moving unseen and reading magical currents without disturbing them, to get close enough to actually observe what was happening inside the annex's walls. Akino slipped through the fence gap an hour after the boy did, moving with a hunter's patience through the overgrown grounds, and found a gap in the building's crumbling outer wall that let her look into the ruined assembly hall without being seen from within. What she found made her breath catch, briefly, in a way very little managed to do anymore. The boy was kneeling in the center of a stone circle carved into the floor, worn but still faintly luminous along its old symbols, and beside him stood a small, curled shape that Akino's trained eye recognized after a moment as a familiar spirit, faded but clearly no longer starving the way abandoned familiars usually were. Near the far wall stood something far more alarming, a tall, scorched construct of ancient armor, motionless, watchful, radiating a guardian's wariness even in stillness. And behind the boy, half visible in the dim evening light filtering through the broken roof, stood a figure Akino had never seen before in any bestiary or old text she had studied, tall and armored and ancient, its ember eyes fixed with quiet attention on the boy at the center of the circle. She did not need her magical senses to recognize what she was looking at. She had felt it the moment she crossed the threshold of the ruined wall, a slow, banked heat radiating from the boy's very presence, contained and dormant but unmistakably, undeniably draconic. She listened for several minutes, careful not to shift her weight against the crumbling stone, catching only fragments of the conversation drifting across the ruined hall. Something about a wisp cluster still refusing to leave the eaves, something about patience, about trust, the ordinary, unremarkable concerns of what looked, more than anything, like a boy quietly caring for a shelter full of forgotten things. It was not what she had expected to find. She had expected, if she was honest, something closer to a threat, a rogue power reveling in newfound strength, dangerous and unpredictable. Instead, she found a 15-year-old boy in a dirty school uniform, gently coaxing a nest of frightened will-o'-the-wisps back down from rafters with nothing more than patient words and an outstretched, glowing hand. She reported back to Rias within the hour, and found her president waiting with an expression that shifted, over the course of the report, from wary anticipation into something far more thoughtful. "He's not hoarding power," Aquino said, settling into her usual seat, her tone carrying none of its usual playful edge. "He's caring for something. An entire shelter full of abandoned spirits and familiars, from the look of it, decades old, tucked away in that ruin. And there's a guardian with him, Rias, something old and clearly powerful in its own right, that seems to be teaching him rather than simply serving him." "A warden," Rias murmured, and at Aquino's questioning look, she gestured toward the stack of old texts still open on the low table between them, texts she had spent the last 2 evenings combing through in search of anything relevant to the town's older, buried history. There are references, very old ones, to bound guardian spirits tasked with protecting shelters for the unaffiliated. Places outside any faction's claim, kept neutral by whoever tended them. I had assumed the tradition died out centuries ago. I did not expect to find one sleeping beneath my own territory. "So what do we do?" Aquino asked. "Approach him?" Rias considered the question for a long moment, tapping one finger thoughtfully against the arm of her chair. Every instinct honed by years of careful territory management told her that a power like the one she had sensed represented an enormous opportunity. A sacred gear of that caliber attached to a peerage would elevate her house's standing considerably, and there was a part of her, quietly and pragmatically, that had already begun composing the offer she would make. But there was another part of her, the part that had watched Aquino's expression while she described a boy patiently coaxing frightened spirits down from broken rafters, that recognized something worth being careful with rather than simply claiming. "Not yet," Rias decided finally. "I want to understand exactly what we are approaching before we approach it. A boy who has spent weeks quietly rebuilding a forgotten sanctuary is not the same as a boy hungry for power, and I would rather not make the mistake of treating him as though he were." "And if someone else finds him first?" Kiba asked quietly from his seat near the window. "You said yourself, Rias, that faint a signature will not stay unnoticed forever. If the fallen angels near the church catch even a fraction of what Kaneko and Aquino have felt." Rias's expression hardened slightly, old caution sharpening into something more protective. "Then we make certain we understand him well enough, and quickly enough, that when the moment comes to introduce ourselves properly, it is an introduction he has reason to welcome rather than fear." She rose from her chair, crossing once more to the window, gazing out toward the dark, ruined shape of the annex just visible above the tree line in the moonlight. "Give it a few more days. Let him continue believing himself unwatched. I would rather learn the shape of what we are dealing with before we risk startling it into something neither of us intended." Outside, unseen, the faint crimson afterglow of a boy's quiet, careful evening's work faded slowly back into the dark, watched now by more careful eyes than the warden had yet realized. Issei noticed the feeling on the 4th night without being able to name it. It was not fear, exactly, not the sharp, immediate alarm he had felt facing down the scorched construct in the ruined chapel. It was quieter than that, a persistent prickle at the back of his neck whenever he crossed the dead grass toward the fence gap, the unmistakable sensation of being observed by something he could not see. He mentioned it to the warden almost offhandedly, expecting to be told it was nothing, an overactive imagination left over from weeks of genuine supernatural upheaval. The warden did not tell him it was nothing. "You are being watched," the ancient guardian confirmed, without hesitation, ember eyes fixed on Issei with an intensity that made the prickle at his neck sharpen into something closer to real unease. "I have suspected as much for 2 nights now. I did not wish to alarm you before I was certain." "Watched by what?" Issei's hand went instinctively to the gem beneath his skin, warm and steady, and Hikari, curled as always around his shoulders, let out a low, uneasy hum. "You said something might come looking, after that, whatever it was that happened when Drake and I laughed too loud." "I said it might. I did not expect it quite this quickly." The warden's rough voice carried a note of grim reassessment. Whoever is watching has been careful. I have not sensed them draw close enough to threaten you directly, only close enough to observe. That suggests caution on their part rather than open hostility, which is, I will admit, more reassuring than the alternative. Devils, Drake rumbled from within Issei's chest, with the flat certainty of something that had encountered this exact pattern many times across many centuries. The careful observation, the unwillingness to approach directly. It carries their particular flavor of patience, partner. They rarely rush into claiming something valuable when they believe watching first will tell them how to claim it more efficiently. Claiming me, Issei repeated, and something cold settled in his stomach at the word. You think somebody's out there deciding whether they want to, recruit me? Like Rias Gremory does with her club? It is a strong possibility, the warden said. The Gremory heiress holds this territory. A signature as significant as yours, however faint, would eventually reach her notice, and devils of her standing do not typically ignore a sacred gear of your caliber sitting unclaimed within their borders. Issei thought, uncomfortably, of the occult research club members he passed sometimes in the school hallways, effortlessly beautiful, effortlessly separate from everyone around them, and of the quiet instinct that had always told him to keep his distance without ever understanding why. What happens if they do come talk to me? He asked slowly. What am I supposed to say? I don't know anything about how any of this actually works, the factions, the politics, any of it. I just wanted to fix up an old building and take care of the things stuck inside it. Then that is precisely what you should tell them, if it comes to that, the warden said, something almost gentle beneath the rough certainty of his voice. You do not owe any faction your loyalty simply because they noticed you first, boy. The old law of this place, the one this annex was built to honor, holds that what shelters here belongs to no crown, no throne, no faction's claim. If you choose, eventually, to seek an alliance with the Gremory House, or any other power, that will be your choice to make freely. It will not be theirs to take from you simply because they arrived at your door first. Though I would caution against dismissing the offer outright, should it come, Drake added, with the weary practicality of something that had seen a great many prideful choices made in haste across the centuries. Alliances are not weaknesses, partner. They are simply choices, and a wise steward weighs an offer honestly before deciding whether to accept or refuse it. Issei absorbed this in silence for a long moment, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor of the assembly hall with Ikari curled warm against his side, and found himself, not for the first time since that terrifying night in the park, wishing he had someone ordinary to talk this through with, a friend from class, anyone who might have understood even a fraction of what his life had quietly become. He did not have that. He had a dragon in his hand, a scarred guardian in a burned chapel, a small ghost fox who trusted him more completely than anyone ever had, and an ancient warden doing his patient, careful best to prepare a 15-year-old boy for a world Issei had never asked to be part of. It would, he supposed, have to be enough. Okay, he said finally, exhaling slowly. So what do we do? Just wait for them to make the first move. For now, yes, the warden said. But I would rather you learn to sense them approaching than remain blind to it, as you have been these past several nights. It is a skill every steward of this place has needed, across every age this annex has stood. Close your eyes. Issei blinked. What, now? Now, the warden confirmed. Your gem carries more than raw power, boy. It carries awareness, if you learn to listen for it properly. Close your eyes, and reach not outward with your fear, but inward, toward the warmth Drake has already given you, and let it show you what your ordinary senses cannot. Issei closed his eyes, feeling foolish, feeling frightened, feeling, underneath both of those things, a stubborn thread of determination that had grown steadily stronger with every night he had spent in this ruined, quietly healing building. He reached inward, toward the warmth pulsing faintly in his palm, and for a long moment there was nothing at all beyond the ordinary darkness behind his own eyelids. Then, faintly, at the very edge of something he did not have proper words for yet, he felt it. A presence, distant, careful, threaded with an elegance that felt nothing like the raw, ancient weight of the warden beside him, watching from somewhere beyond the tree line with a patience that had clearly been practiced for a very long time. His eyes snapped open. There's something out there. Someone. I can feel them. The warden's ember eyes brightened with something that looked, unmistakably, like quiet pride. There it is, he said softly. That is the beginning of true awareness, Issei Hyoudou. Whatever comes next, whoever is waiting beyond that tree line, you will not face it blind. That, more than any strength Drake has given you, is what will keep this place, and everything within it, safe in the days ahead. Outside, unseen but no longer entirely unfelt, Akino Himejima paused in the shadow of the tree line, feeling, for just a moment, the unmistakable sensation of being noticed in return, and smiled faintly to herself in the dark. He was ready sooner than she had expected. Rias made her decision the morning after Akino reported that the boy had, however faintly, sensed her watching. If he can feel us now, waiting any longer only risks him growing more suspicious rather than more prepared, she explained to her peerage that evening, pulling on a light jacket over her school uniform, the sun already low enough to paint the clubroom in long amber shadows. Better he meets us on our terms, calm and deliberate, than stumbles into a confrontation driven by fear of being cornered. Are we going in force? Kiba asked, already reaching for his jacket as well. No. Rias's tone left no room for argument. A full peerage arriving at once will look like exactly the kind of claim I promised myself I would not make carelessly. Akino and I will go. The rest of you remain here, in reserve, in case I am wrong about how carefully this warden guards its boy. The walk across the darkening campus felt longer than it should have, past the looming silhouette of the old building, through dead grass gone silver in the rising moonlight, toward the crumbling shape of the annex waiting beyond the tree line like something the town itself had tried very hard to forget. Rias felt the ambient pressure of the place grow heavier with every step, old magic layered thick into stone and ash, and understood, more clearly now than from any distance, exactly why this location had remained undisturbed for so many decades. She found the gap in the fence Kaneko had described, and beyond it, a door hanging slightly ajar on rusted hinges, faint crimson light flickering somewhere deep within. Rias, Akino murmured beside her, voice low. He knows we're here. I can feel him watching already. Good, Rias said quietly. Then let's not keep him waiting. They crossed the threshold together, and the moment they did, the temperature of the air itself seemed to shift, old and watchful and unmistakably, deliberately alert to their presence. Rias led the way down the narrow corridor toward the source of the light, footsteps echoing softly on warped floorboards, until they emerged into the ruined assembly hall. The boy was already standing, facing the doorway, backpack discarded near the wall, his posture wary but steady, a small translucent fox pressed close against his side with its ears flattened and its eyes wide with distrust. Behind him, filling the far end of the hall with a presence that made Rias's breath catch despite every ounce of composure she had spent years cultivating, stood the warden, ember eyes fixed unblinking on the two devils who had just crossed into his hall uninvited. That's far enough, the boy said, and though his voice wavered slightly at the edges, he did not step back. I know you've been watching me. I felt you a couple nights ago. So I'm just going to ask straight out. Who are you, and what do you want? Rias stopped a careful, respectful distance from the circle at the room's center, and inclined her head, deliberately, in a gesture of formal courtesy she reserved for exactly this kind of first, delicate meeting. My name is Rias Gremory, she said. I hold responsibility for this town's supernatural territory, on behalf of my house. This is Akino Himejima, my queen. We mean you no harm, and we have not come to take anything from you by force. I only wish to meet, properly, the person responsible for the power I have felt echoing from this place these past several weeks. The boy's eyes flicked, briefly, uncertainly, toward the warden, as if seeking permission or reassurance before answering. The warden, notably, offered neither immediately, ember eyes remaining fixed on Rias with an ancient, unreadable patience. I'm Issei, the boy said finally, cautious but no longer quite as guarded. Issei Hyoudou. I go to Ko Academy. Same as you, I guess, since you're the club president everyone talks about. I am, Rias confirmed, allowing a small, genuine smile to soften her formal bearing, just slightly. And I will admit, Issei Hyoudou, that I did not expect to find a fellow student quietly restoring a shelter for abandoned spirits, when I finally traced the source of a signature powerful enough to reach my clubroom from across the entire campus. Issei's shoulders relaxed, fractionally, at the acknowledgement, though the small fox at his side remained tense, watching Akino in particular with obvious wariness. I'm not trying to cause trouble, Issei said. I didn't even know any of this existed a month ago. I just found this place, and there were things trapped here that needed help, and I couldn't just walk away and pretend I hadn't seen them. That, Rias said quietly, is precisely the answer I hoped to hear, and precisely the reason I chose to come alone rather than in force. I have no interest in claiming what you have built here, Issei. I came only to introduce myself, and to make clear that whatever you choose to do with this place, and with the power you now carry, you need not do it in secret from the rest of us. It was, Issei realized with some surprise, an offer far gentler than anything he had braced himself for, and for a moment the tension in the ruined hall eased, just slightly, the ancient watchfulness of the warden settling by a fraction, the small fox at his side loosening its rigid stance. Then the door behind Rias and Akino slammed shut with a violence that had nothing to do with wind. Every head in the hall turned sharply toward the sound. The warden's ember eyes flared instantly, brighter, harder, tracking something beyond the walls that none of the humans or devils present could yet sense. Someone else followed you here, the warden said, low and urgent, already moving to place himself between the doorway and the boy he had sworn to protect. Someone considerably less courteous than the Gremory heiress, judging by the manner of their arrival. Rias's expression hardened instantly, all the careful diplomacy of a moment ago giving way to sharp, immediate wariness. That's not one of mine, she said, already turning toward the sealed door, crimson magic beginning to gather, unbidden, around her clenched fist. Akino. On it, Akino murmured, and the playful lilt had entirely vanished from her voice, replaced by something far more dangerous. Outside the annex's ruined walls, unseen in the deep shadow of the tree line, a lone figure watched the flickering crimson light spilling from the broken windows with cold, calculating interest, and smiled the particular smile of something that had been hunting far longer, and far more patiently, than anyone currently inside that building yet realized. The figure that stepped through the shattered remains of the annex's outer wall a moment later was not what Issei had braced himself for. He had expected, somehow, something monstrous, given the weight of dread that had settled over the ruined hall the instant the door slammed shut. Instead, the figure who strode calmly through the settling dust looked almost ordinary, a man perhaps in his late 20s, sharp-featured and dressed in a long dark coat, save for the single detail that made every instinct in Issei's body recoil at once, the pair of black, feathered wings unfolding slowly from his back as he came to a stop just inside the broken wall. A fallen angel, Rias said, and her voice had gone cold in a way Issei had not yet heard from her. You are trespassing on Gremory territory. Territory. The fallen angel's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. How generous of the Underworld to keep drawing lines on a map none of the rest of us agreed to. I'm not here for territory, little devil. I felt something far more interesting than your borders 3 nights ago, and I've been very patient tracking it down. His eyes slid past Rias entirely, past Akino, and settled on Issei with an intensity that made the boy's stomach drop. There you are, the fallen angel murmured, almost fondly, the way one might greet a long-sought prize rather than a person. A Longinus-class sacred gear, sitting completely unclaimed in a sealed-off ruin nobody bothered to check. Do you have any idea what a mind like Kokobil's would pay for a boy like you, delivered fresh and unclaimed by any faction at all? Stay away from him, the warden said, and the rough authority in that single sentence carried enough weight that even the fallen angel's confident stride faltered, just slightly. And who exactly are you supposed to be? The fallen angel's gaze swept over the towering, armored guardian with a flicker of genuine surprise, quickly smoothed back into arrogance. Some old relic dragged out of storage. Cute. But relics don't stop spears, old thing, and I didn't come unprepared. He raised one hand, and a spear of crackling black light condensed instantly above his open palm, the same terrible weapon Issei remembered from that night in the park with a clarity that made his knees threaten to buckle all over again. Issei, the warden said sharply, without taking his ember eyes off the gathering spear, behind me. Now, Issei did not need to be told twice. He scrambled back, Hikari clinging tight around his neck, As Rias stepped forward with crimson power already crackling around her clenched fist, Akino's expression sharpening into something genuinely dangerous as lightning began, faintly, to spark along her fingertips. "You are outnumbered," Rias said, her voice low and hard. "Leave now, and I will consider not reporting this incursion to the Underworld's Border Council." Outnumbered. The fallen angel's smile widened, and something about the confidence in it made a cold, prickling unease settle over the whole ruined hall. "You misunderstand, little devil. I didn't come alone either." Shadows shifted at the broken wall behind him, and two more figures stepped through, wings unfolding in the dim crimson light, each carrying the same crackling promise of violence. The standoff that followed lasted only seconds, though it felt, to Issei, like it stretched on for an eternity, every party in that ruined hall calculating odds, weighing risk, searching for the first opening that would tip the coming clash decisively in their favor. He felt Drake's presence coil tight behind his ribs, a readiness humming just beneath the surface of his skin, and understood, with a lurch of certainty, that whatever happened in the next few moments, hiding behind the warden's broad back was not going to be enough to keep everyone in this hall safe. "Get the boy out," Rias said quietly to Akino, not taking her eyes off the lead fallen angel. "I'll hold them." "Rias, 3 against 1 is not a fair fight. Now, Akino." The lead fallen angel's spear ignited fully, crackling with barely restrained violence, and he lunged forward with a speed that blurred the space between them, aimed not at Rias at all, but past her, straight toward the boy cowering behind an ancient guardian's protective stance. "I don't think so," the warden growled, and moved. What happened next unfolded too fast for Issei's ordinary eyes to fully track. A blur of scorched armor and crackling black light, the warden's massive form intercepting the spear's path with a strength that sent a shockwave rippling through the entire ruined hall, dust and loose stone raining from the broken ceiling above. The fallen angel staggered back, clearly startled by resistance he had not expected from something he had dismissed as a relic only moments before. "Interesting," the fallen angel said, wiping a thin line of blood from his mouth where the shockwave had thrown him against broken debris, his earlier arrogance cooling into something far more calculating. "More fight in the old thing than I expected. No matter. We have all night, and I am very rarely in a hurry when the prize is this valuable." Issei, crouched behind the warden with his heart hammering against his ribs, felt the gem in his palm flare suddenly, painfully hot, and heard Drake's voice rise from a low rumble into something sharper, more urgent, than he had ever heard from the dragon before. "Partner, they mean to take you tonight, one way or another, and the warden alone cannot hold 3 of them indefinitely. If there was ever a moment to decide how far you are willing to go to protect what you have built here, that moment has arrived." Issei stared at his own trembling hand, at the crimson light pulsing beneath his skin, at the ruined hall around him filled with people willing to fight, and possibly bleed, for a boy they had only just met, and felt something shift inside him, quiet and immense, the last hesitant thread of the frightened boy from 3 weeks ago finally, irrevocably, beginning to burn away. The lead fallen angel's spear met the warden's raised forearm with a crack that shook loose stone from the broken ceiling above, and for one suspended moment the entire ruined hall seemed to hold its breath around the impact. Rias moved the instant the shockwave passed, crimson power gathering into a compact, blazing sphere between her palms before she hurled it at the second fallen angel circling toward her flank. He twisted aside, wings snapping wide to carry him clear, but the edge of her power still caught his trailing coat and set it briefly alight, and he snarled in surprised fury as he beat it out against the broken stone floor. "Akino, the boy is priority," Rias called, already summoning a second sphere of destruction to her hand. "I have this." "You do not have 3 of them alone," Akino shot back, but she was already moving, lightning crackling along her fingertips as she placed herself between Issei and the third fallen angel drifting toward the shadows near the far wall, clearly hoping to circle around unnoticed. Issei crouched behind the warden's braced stance, Hikari trembling tight against his neck, watching the chaos unfold with a horror that made his chest ache almost as badly as the burning in his palm. Every part of him wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but the center of a fight 3 powerful strangers were currently willing to bleed over. He did not run. "Partner," Drake's voice cut through the panic, low and steady, an anchor in the noise. "Fear is reasonable. It is also, at this moment, a luxury none of us can afford. Look at what is happening around you. The warden bleeds for you. The Gremory heiress bleeds for you. Ask yourself honestly whether you intend to remain a boy who only watches others fight on his behalf. Issei's breath caught. He looked up, past the warden's braced arm, and saw the guardian's scorched plating cracked along one shoulder where the spear had struck, a thin line of something that was not quite blood but was clearly not nothing either, seeping slowly from the wound. You're hurt, Issei said, horrified. I have endured worse, the warden said through gritted, ancient teeth, forcing the lead fallen angel's second thrust wide with a grinding effort that made the crack in his shoulder plating widen further. I am considerably diminished from what I once was, boy. I will hold as long as I am able, but I will not lie to you and pretend that is indefinitely. The lead fallen angel disengaged, circling back a step, eyeing the warden's damaged shoulder with renewed, calculating interest. Diminished, he repeated, almost thoughtfully. So the old relic does have a limit after all. Good. I was beginning to worry this would take all night. He raised his hand again, and this time 2 spears of crackling black light condensed above his open palm instead of one, twin points of violence aimed with lazy, contemptuous confidence at a guardian he now clearly believed was moments from breaking. No, Issei said, and the word came out of him with a force that surprised even himself. He did not think about what happened next. He would try, later, to explain it to the warden and to Drake both, and find that there were no words adequate to the moment, only the memory of raw, overwhelming instinct taking over where careful thought had run out of time. He surged up from behind the warden's braced stance, placing himself directly between the guardian and the twin spears now hurtling toward them both, his hand thrust forward on pure reflex, the crimson gem beneath his skin blazing suddenly, violently bright. Boost. The word rang through the ruined hall like a physical force, Drake's voice no longer confined to the private space behind Issei's ribs but roaring out into the open air, and a wave of red light burst from the gauntlet that had suddenly, impossibly, formed around Issei's outstretched hand, meeting the twin spears head-on. The explosion that followed threw everyone in the hall from their feet. Issei hit the broken floor hard, dust and debris raining down around him, ears ringing from the force of the collision, and for a long, disoriented moment, he could not tell whether he was still in one piece at all. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto his elbows, and found the twin spears had not merely been deflected. They had shattered entirely, black light dissolving into nothing against the barrier of crimson energy that still hung, faintly shimmering, in the air where his outstretched hand had been. The lead fallen angel stared at the dissipating barrier with an expression that had shifted, in an instant, from contemptuous confidence into something far more wary. Well, he said slowly, wings flaring wide as he retreated a cautious step. That is considerably more resistance than I expected from an untrained vessel. Issei looked down at his own hand, at the gauntlet of crimson and black scale now wrapped around his forearm, at the single, brilliant green gem set into its back, pulsing in perfect rhythm with his racing heart, and felt something shift inside him that had nothing to do with fear at all. There it is, partner, Drake said, and for the first time since Issei had woken to that rumbling voice, he could hear, unmistakably, something like satisfaction in it. Welcome to the fight. Let us see what you are truly capable of. The gauntlet felt strange around his forearm, heavier than he expected and yet somehow weightless at the same time, humming with a power that seemed to answer his heartbeat rather than his thoughts. Issei stared at it for only a moment before the second fallen angel, the one Rias had briefly set alight, came at him from the side with a fresh spear already crackling to life in her hand. He barely had time to react. Instinct alone drove his gauntlet fist up to meet the spear's downward arc, and where flesh should have shattered against the weapon's crackling edge, the crimson scales along his forearm held firm, deflecting the blow wide with a force that clearly startled its wielder more than it hurt him. Drake, Issei gasped, staggering back a step from the impact. What do? I don't know how any of this actually works. You already know more than you believe, partner. The boosted gear does not simply grant strength. It doubles what already exists within you, again and again, so long as you have the will to keep calling on it. Say the word, and let instinct guide the rest. I will handle what your body does not yet know how to. Issei did not fully understand what that meant, not intellectually. But something in him recognized the shape of the offer regardless, and he closed his eyes for the barest fraction of a second, reaching for the same warmth he had learned to find during quiet evenings, coaxing frightened spirits out of the dark, and let it answer the call now blazing through his blood instead. "Boost," he said, and the gauntlet flared bright in response, the word ringing out across the ruined hall a second time. The surge that followed nearly buckled his knees, an overwhelming rush of strength flooding through every muscle at once, and he caught himself against a length of broken support beam, breathing hard, feeling his own heartbeat hammering with a power that had not been there a moment before. The second fallen angel, recovering from her earlier stagger, lunged at him again, clearly determined not to let the momentary advantage slip a second time. This time Issei moved to meet her. He was not skilled, not by any measure a trained fighter would recognize, his footwork clumsy, his guard instinctive rather than practiced. But raw power, doubled and doubling again with every desperate heartbeat, made up for a great deal that technique alone could not, and when his gauntlet fist finally connected with her shoulder in a glancing, off-balance blow, the force of it sent her crashing backward through a section of crumbling wall entirely, dust and broken stone burying her beneath a small avalanche of debris. Across the hall, Akino's lightning finally found its mark against the third fallen angel, the one who had tried circling unseen toward the shadows, and he crumpled with a sharp cry, wings twitching uselessly against the scorched stone floor. That left only the lead fallen angel, still circling warily near the ruined outer wall, watching Issei with an expression that had curdled entirely from arrogance into something far more calculating and considerably more afraid. "Impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else in the hall. "An untrained boy should not be able to boost that quickly. That kind of resonance takes years to cultivate, even for talented vessels." "Maybe I had a good teacher," Issei said, and though his voice still shook slightly with adrenaline, there was something new beneath the fear now, something steadier, something that had not existed in him 3 weeks ago in that quiet, ordinary park. He glanced briefly at the warden, still braced protectively nearby despite the crack still visible in his scorched shoulder plating, ember eyes fixed on the remaining fallen angel with unwavering, ancient vigilance. He glanced at Rias, breathing hard but standing tall, crimson power still coiled and ready in her open palm. He glanced at Akino, lightning still crackling faintly along her fingertips as she kept a careful eye on the 2 fallen angels she had already downed, in case either found the strength to rise again. None of them had run. None of them had hesitated to bleed for him, a boy they had barely known for more than a handful of minutes, and something about that steadied Issei's racing heart more than any amount of raw draconic power ever could. "You should probably go," Issei said to the remaining fallen angel, and found, to his own quiet surprise, that his voice did not waver at all this time. "Because I'm not scared anymore. And I'm not going to let you take anything from this place." The lead fallen angel's jaw tightened, calculation warring visibly with pride across his sharp features, before pragmatism finally, grudgingly, won out. He spat something bitter under his breath, wings flaring wide, and in a single sharp motion scooped his 2 downed companions up from the rubble, hauling them both clear despite their weak, groaning protests. "This isn't finished," he called back over his shoulder, already retreating toward the shattered outer wall. "Kokobile will hear about this. A rogue dragon vessel this powerful does not stay unclaimed for long, boy, whatever protection you think you've found tonight." He vanished into the darkness beyond the broken wall, his companions in tow, and for a long, ringing moment the ruined hall held nothing but silence, dust still drifting slowly down through the shattered ceiling above, the faint crimson glow of Issei's gauntlet the only steady light left in the room. Then Issei's knees finally gave out entirely, and he sat down hard on the broken floor, staring at his own trembling, gauntlet hand with an expression somewhere between disbelief and exhausted, overwhelming relief. "I did that," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "I actually did that." "You did," Drake confirmed, and the satisfaction in his voice had deepened into something that sounded, unmistakably, like genuine pride. "Rest now, partner. You have more than earned it. But do not mistake tonight's victory for the end of this." That one meant what he said. "This is only the beginning." Rias knelt beside the warden a few minutes later, examining the crack in his scorched shoulder plating with a healer's careful attention, though the ancient guardian bore the inspection with visible, stubborn reluctance. "This needs proper attention," she said. "I have healing magic that could help, if you would allow it. I have endured far worse than a cracked plate across far longer than you have been alive, Gremory heiress," the warden said, though something in his rough voice had softened considerably in the aftermath of the fight, a wary respect replacing the earlier ancient suspicion. "But I will not refuse a genuine offer of aid, given freely rather than as the price of some hidden bargain." Rias's healing magic settled over the crack in warm, gentle waves of crimson light, and slowly, visibly, the damaged plating began to knit itself back together, the seeping wound along the warden's shoulder closing entirely within a few careful minutes. Issei watched the entire exchange from where he sat against the broken support beam, Hikari curled once more in his lap, still trembling faintly from the fear of the fight even as her small body pressed close and grateful against his exhausted warmth. The boosted gear had receded from his forearm the moment the danger passed, leaving behind only ordinary, aching muscles and a bone-deep exhaustion he had never felt before in his life. "Thank you," he said quietly, once Rias had finished, once the ruined hall had settled into something closer to calm. "For staying. For fighting. You didn't have to do that." "I very much did," Rias said, rising and brushing dust from her uniform with a wry, tired smile. "I would not have been able to live with myself, watching 3 fallen angels attempt to abduct a boy I had only just introduced myself to, in a shelter he had spent weeks quietly building with his own 2 hands. Some things are simply worth defending, Issei Hyoudou, regardless of whether the person defending them has known you for 3 weeks or 3 minutes. Akino settled onto a nearby length of fallen beam, examining a shallow scrape along her forearm with more curiosity than concern. "That was Kokobil's name he invoked before he fled," she said, glancing toward Rias. "That is not a small threat to have made in passing." "I know." Rias's expression sobered considerably. "Kokobil commands significant influence among the fallen angels stationed in this region, and he has a reputation for taking a very personal interest in anything that might upset the current balance of power. If he learns the details of what happened here tonight, I would not be surprised to see considerably more organized attention turned toward this annex before long." Issei felt his exhausted relief curdle, slowly, back into something closer to dread. "So this isn't over?" "No," Rias admitted, with the kind of honesty Issei was beginning to genuinely appreciate, even when the truth itself was unwelcome. "I do not believe it is. Which is precisely why I want to offer you something more concrete than the introduction I originally intended tonight." She met his eyes directly, her earlier formal courtesy giving way to something more sincere. "I will not pretend the offer is without benefit to my own house," she said. "A sacred gear of your caliber, formally allied with my peerage, would be a considerable asset, and I would be lying if I claimed that had no bearing on my thinking. But I want to be equally clear that I am not offering you a cage, Issei. I am offering an alliance. Protection, resources, and standing within the factions that would make Kokobil considerably less eager to move openly against you, in exchange for nothing more than your willingness to stand with my house should the need ever arise." Issei looked down at Hikari, curled trusting and exhausted in his lap, and thought of the scarred construct still standing silent watch in the ruined chapel, and thought of the small, faded spirits still scattered throughout this building waiting for someone to finally coax them back into trust. He thought, too, of the warden's earlier words, about choices that belonged to him freely rather than being claimed by whoever arrived first. "I want to think about it," he said finally, and though his voice was tired, it was steady. "Not because I don't trust you. You fought for me tonight, and that matters a lot. But this place isn't just mine to decide things for. There are things here that got left behind once already, by people who made promises and then disappeared. I'm not going to make a decision that could put them at risk without being sure I'm making the right one." Something in Rias's expression shifted, warm and genuinely impressed, entirely free of the calculating edge that had colored her first appraisal weeks earlier from behind the clubroom's tall window. "That," she said, "is exactly the kind of answer that makes me even more certain I would rather have you as an ally than a stranger, Issei Hyoudou. Take the time you need. My offer will still be here when you are ready. And so, I hope, will I, if trouble finds this place again before then. She turned to go, Akino rising beside her, and paused at the ruined hall's broken doorway, glancing back one final time at the boy still sitting exhausted amid the wreckage of a fight that had nearly cost him everything. For what it's worth, she added quietly, I think whatever you are building here is worth protecting. Whatever you decide, I hope you know that is true regardless of any alliance between us. She left, Akino close behind her, the sound of their footsteps fading into the quiet dark beyond the shattered wall, and Issei sat alone in the ruined hall with the warden and Hikari and the last dying embers of adrenaline slowly draining from his exhausted body, and allowed himself, for the first time since a fallen angel's smile had turned into something monstrous weeks ago in a quiet park, to simply breathe. You did well tonight, the warden said softly, settling down beside him with the careful, deliberate movement of something ancient and still slightly weary from the fight. Better than I dared hope for, this early into your path. I was terrified, Issei admitted, as you should have been. The warden's ember eyes, dimmed now with fatigue, still carried a warmth Issei had come to recognize over these past weeks. Courage was never the absence of fear, boy. It is simply the choice to act rightly despite it. You made that choice tonight, more than once, and I suspect you will be called to make it again before this is finished. Issei closed his eyes, exhaustion finally pulling him towards sleep even sitting upright against a broken beam, and thought, in the last hazy moments before rest claimed him entirely, that whatever came next, Kokabeel, or the Underworld's politics or any of the dangers still waiting beyond these broken walls, he was no longer facing any of it alone. Issei's mother noticed the limp before she noticed anything else, the moment he shuffled through the front door well past his usual hour, dust still clinging faintly to his uniform despite his best efforts to brush it clean in the dark outside. Issei, what on earth happened to you? She crossed the kitchen in an instant, hands hovering worriedly over the shallow scrape along his forearm he had not managed to hide well enough. Did you fall? Were you in a fight? I tripped on my bike, Issei said, the lie coming easier than he was entirely comfortable with, smooth and practiced after weeks of quietly managing a double life his family knew nothing about. It's fine, Mom, really. I just need to clean up and sleep. She fussed over him anyway, the way mothers always did regardless of how firmly their teenage sons insisted they were fine, and Issei let her, grateful in a way he could not properly explain for the ordinary, mundane worry of a parent who knew nothing about fallen angels or ancient guardians or the crimson gem now settled permanently beneath the skin of his palm. It was, he thought as he finally climbed into bed that night, body aching in places he had not known could ache, strange how quickly a person could learn to carry two entirely separate lives at once, one small and safe and ordinary, the other vast and dangerous and increasingly, undeniably his own. He returned to the annex the following evening, exhausted but unwilling to let even a single day pass without checking on the small, fragile community he had spent weeks carefully rebuilding. He found Hikari waiting near the entrance, more animated than he had ever seen her, bounding in tight, excited circles the moment she caught sight of him, her earlier terror from the fight apparently already softened by the simple, uncomplicated relief of seeing him whole and safe again. Hey girl, Issei said, crouching to let her climb into his arms, her small translucent body settling warm and solid against his chest in a way that had grown, over these past weeks, to feel like the truest kind of home he had. I'm okay. We're okay. The scarred construct in the ruined chapel had reacted differently to the previous night's violence, Issei discovered when he made his way there afterward, standing straighter and more alert than he had in all the weeks since Issei first coaxed it out of its corner, its dim, unstable eye now burning with a steadier, more purposeful light. It felt the fight, the warden explained, joining him in the chapel's ruined doorway. Even from this distance, the resonance of real battle reached it. I suspect, in whatever remains of its old programming, it recognized something familiar in that violence, a reminder of the very purpose it was built for. It has been considerably more restless since. Restless how? Is that bad? Not bad, the warden said thoughtfully. Simply awake in a way it has not been in a very long time. I believe, if you approached it now, you might find it more receptive than it has been thus far. Issei crossed the chapel slowly, the way he had learned to approach every frightened, faded thing in this building, patient and unhurried, palm open and glowing faintly with the gem's steady warmth. The construct's dim eye tracked his approach with none of its earlier hostile wariness, only a quiet, watchful attention that felt, for the first time, closer to recognition than suspicion. You protected this place, once, Issei said softly, echoing the words he had offered weeks earlier in that same ruined room. Last night, I think I finally understood what that actually meant. What it costs, to stand between something you care about and something trying to hurt it. The construct's scorched, gauntlet hand lifted, slowly, and for one uncertain moment Issei thought it might be readying to strike again, old fear briefly resurfacing despite his best efforts to stay calm. Instead the massive hand turned palm upward, mirroring the gesture Issei had offered, an unmistakable invitation rather than a threat. Issei stepped forward and pressed his own smaller palm against the construct's scarred, ancient one, and felt the gem beneath his skin flare bright and warm, felt something settle into place between them with a quiet, solid certainty entirely different from the trembling, hesitant bond Hikari had first offered weeks ago. This felt less like coaxing something frightened out of hiding, and more like two soldiers recognizing, at last, that they stood on the same side of a fight neither had chosen alone. There, the warden said quietly from the doorway, and Issei could hear, unmistakably, something like satisfaction in the ancient guardian's rough voice. Another bond formed, boy, and a strong one at that. You are building something remarkable here, whether you fully realize it yet or not. Issei looked around the small, ruined chapel, at the construct now standing a little taller beside him, at Hikari curled contentedly against his shoulder, and thought of Rias Gremory's offer still waiting patiently for his answer, and of the fallen angel's parting threats still echoing uneasily in the back of his mind. I need to talk to everyone here, he said slowly, an idea forming with the same quiet, deliberate certainty that had carried him through every difficult choice these past weeks. All of them. The wisps, the garden spirit, everyone we've found so far. If Rias is right, and this isn't over, then I think it's time I actually explained what's happening, instead of just quietly fixing things and hoping nobody notices we're here. A wise instinct, the warden agreed. A steward who hides the truth from those under his care, even with good intentions, rarely earns lasting trust. What do you intend to tell them? Issei thought about it for a long moment, watching the last of the evening light fade through the chapel's broken roof, and felt, beneath the exhaustion and the lingering fear, something steadier taking root in its place. The truth, he said finally. That things are about to get more dangerous. Probably a lot more dangerous. And that I'm not going anywhere, no matter how bad it gets. I just want them to actually hear it from me, so nobody's caught off guard the way I almost was last night. Gathering everyone in the annex proved more complicated than Issei expected, if only because half of what he was gathering could not properly speak, and the other half had spent decades learning that trust was something to be doled out in the smallest possible increments. Still, over the following 2 evenings, with the warden's patient guidance, Issei made his way through every corner of the ruined building, coaxing the cluster of will-o'-the-wisps down from the eaves where they still occasionally scattered at loud noises, sitting quietly beside the dark garden spirit bound to the courtyard's one surviving tree until it offered him, unprompted, a second full sentence for the first time since they had met. One by one, the scattered, faded residents of the annex made their way toward the assembly hall, drawn by some combination of curiosity and the warden's quiet reassurance that their steward wished to speak with them all together. Issei stood at the center of the old stone circle that evening, Hikari perched on his shoulder, the scarred construct positioned watchfully near the doorway, the will-o'-the-wisps drifting in a loose, glowing cluster near the broken ceiling, the garden spirit rooted just inside the threshold with its knotted, wooden face turned attentively toward him. It was, he thought, looking around at the small, strange, patchwork family he had built over the past several weeks, the strangest classroom he could possibly have imagined standing in front of. I don't really know how to do speeches, he admitted, and a faint, nervous laugh escaped him despite the seriousness of the moment. So I'm just going to tell you what happened, and what I think it means, and you can all decide for yourselves how you feel about it. He told them about the fallen angels, about the fight, about the threat the lead attacker had made on his way out the shattered wall. He told them, honestly, that he did not know exactly what would come next, only that it was unlikely to simply go away on its own. I'm not going anywhere, he said finally, meeting as many of their gazes as he could manage, human and spirit and construct alike. Whatever happens next, I'm staying, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep this place safe, and keep all of you safe. But I wanted you to hear that from me directly, instead of just hoping you'd never notice things had gotten more dangerous. The wisps drifted closer in response, their soft glow pulsing in a rhythm that felt, unmistakably, like agreement. The garden spirit inclined its knotted head, slow and deliberate, the closest thing to a nod its ancient, rooted form could manage. The construct's dim eye brightened, just slightly, a silent promise of continued vigilance. Hikari pressed her small face against his cheek, warm and unwavering. They understand, the warden said quietly, watching the small, wordless gathering with an expression that carried, beneath its ancient weight, something that looked remarkably like pride. Better than you may realize, boy. Every one of them has already lived through being abandoned once. What you have offered them tonight is not safety, not truly, not with the danger that still waits beyond these walls. What you have offered them is honesty, and the promise that whatever comes, they will not face it forgotten and alone a second time. That matters more to creatures like these than any guarantee of safety ever could. Issei let out a slow breath, feeling something settle in his chest that had been tight and uncertain since the previous night's fight, a quiet, steady resolve replacing the last lingering edges of fear. So what happens now? He asked. Do we just wait for Kokabile or whoever else to show up next? We prepare, the warden said. You are stronger than you were 3 weeks ago, considerably stronger, and you will only continue to grow from here. But strength alone will not be enough if Kokabile decides to move against this place with the full weight of his influence behind him. We will need allies, careful planning, and time, and I do not know exactly how much of that last resource we truly have. Far beyond the annex's broken walls, in a place neither Issei nor the warden could sense from this distance, the lead fallen angel who had fled the previous night's failed abduction knelt before a far older, far more dangerous figure, delivering his report with the careful, wary precision of someone reporting a failure to a superior who did not tolerate failure gracefully. A rogue Longinus vessel, the older fallen angel repeated slowly, dark eyes narrowing with an interest that carried nothing gentle within it. Unclaimed, unaffiliated, and already resisting recruitment from the local devil faction. That is either an extraordinary opportunity, or an extraordinary threat, depending entirely on how quickly we move to address it. What are your orders, Kokabile? Kokabile rose slowly from his seat, wings unfolding with an unhurried, deliberate menace that had made stronger men than the kneeling fallen angel before him tremble in the past, and turned his gaze toward a window overlooking the distant, unremarkable lights of Ko Town, somewhere beneath which a boy who did not yet understand the true scale of the danger he had just drawn was quietly rebuilding a shelter for the forgotten. Gather what remains of our forces in this region, Kokabile said, and something in his cold, measured voice carried the particular weight of a decision already made, a plan already forming with the patient, ruthless precision of someone who had waited centuries for exactly this kind of opportunity to present itself. If the boy will not come willingly, and will not be claimed quietly, then we will simply have to make the alternative considerably less appealing than surrender. He smiled, thin and cold, and somewhere beneath his feet, unfelt and unheard, the quiet, fragile peace Issei had spent 3 weeks so carefully building continued, unaware, toward the storm now beginning, deliberately and patiently, to gather against it. Rias returned to the annex 3 days later, this time with her entire peerage in tow, and the moment Issei saw the seriousness in her expression, he understood the visit was not simply a courtesy. Kokabile, she said without preamble, once introductions had been made and the wary construct near the doorway had finally settled into watchful stillness rather than open suspicion, is not a threat I would wish on anyone, let alone a steward barely a month into carrying a power like yours. He commands considerable loyalty among the fallen angels stationed in this region, and he has a long, well-documented history of provoking exactly the kind of conflict that benefits no one but himself. So what does that mean for us? Issei asked, glancing instinctively toward the warden, who stood nearby with his usual ancient patience, though even his ember eyes had sharpened slightly at Kokabile's name. It means we should assume he will not wait indefinitely to act, Rias said. Which is why I brought reinforcements today, of a different kind than the last visit. She gestured toward the doorway, where a second young woman had been waiting with quiet, composed patience, dark hair cut in a precise bob, glasses catching the dim light of the ruined hall. This is Sona Shirtorai, student council president at Ko Academy, and the devil who holds authority alongside me over this territory. I asked her here because I believe you deserve to understand the full picture of who is watching this town, not simply the parts that concern my own house. Sona inclined her head with brisk, formal courtesy. Rias has told me a great deal about you these past few days, Hyoudou. I confess I was skeptical of an unaffiliated Longinus vessel maintaining an entire shelter of unclaimed spirits without a single incident until now. Having seen the state of this place, I am considerably less skeptical. Is that a compliment? Issei asked, uncertain. It is an observation, Sona said, though the faint curve at the corner of her mouth suggested it was not entirely without warmth. I do not offer compliments freely. I do offer, however, a genuine assessment of your situation, and I believe it would benefit you to hear it plainly rather than softened. Issei straightened slightly, bracing himself. Go ahead. Kokabeel has moved forces into this region before, in smaller numbers, testing boundaries rather than committing fully, Sona said. What Rias's peerage encountered here 3 nights ago was almost certainly a scouting action rather than his true intention. If he has decided you represent a threat worth addressing directly, the next move will not be 3 lesser fallen angels testing your defenses. It will be considerably larger, and considerably better coordinated. The blunt honesty of it settled cold in Issei's stomach, and beside him, Hikari pressed closer against his side, sensing the shift in his mood even without understanding the words themselves. Then what do we do? He asked. I can't exactly call the police on a several thousand-year-old fallen angel commander. No, Sona agreed. But you can prepare, considerably more thoroughly than 3 weeks of instinctive, self-taught bonding with abandoned spirits has allowed for thus far. Rias tells me your boosted gear activated for the first time only 3 nights ago, under duress. That is precisely the kind of gap in training that gets vessels killed, however powerful the sacred gear itself may ultimately become. Rias stepped forward, her earlier formal composure softening into something more direct, more personal. I would like to offer you training, Issei. Not recruitment, not obligation, simply the chance to learn how to use what you carry properly, from people who have spent years learning to survive exactly the kind of danger you are now facing. Kiba can teach you close combat discipline. Akino understands elemental control better than almost anyone I know. And I can help you understand the political landscape well enough that you are never blindsided the way you nearly were 3 nights ago. Issei looked between Rias and Sona, weighing the offer against everything the warden had taught him about choices freely made rather than pressured into, and found, to his own quiet relief, that this offer carried none of the uncomfortable weight the first one had. What's the catch? He asked anyway, because 3 weeks of sudden supernatural upheaval had taught him, if nothing else, to ask. No catch, Rias said simply. I told you before, Issei. I would rather you choose an alliance with my house freely, when and if you decide it serves you, than have you forced into one out of desperation because Kokabeel's forces overwhelmed you before you were ready. Training does not obligate you to anything beyond the training itself. The warden, who had remained silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke, his rough voice carrying quiet, deliberate weight into the conversation. I would advise you to accept, boy. I have taught you what an old guardian confined to this ruin can teach, and I do not regret a moment of it. But I cannot spar with you at full strength without risking real harm, not in my current diminished state, and the Gremory heiress offers precisely the kind of structured, practice training neither Drake nor I can provide alone. Issei considered it for one final moment, looking around at the small, patchwork family he had built in this ruined hall, at Hikari and the construct and the wisp still drifting faintly near the broken ceiling, and understood, with a clarity that had grown steadily over these past difficult weeks, that protecting them properly meant becoming someone capable of protecting them, not simply someone willing to try. Okay, he said finally. I'll train. But I want to keep coming back here every evening, no matter what. This place still needs me too. Of course, Rias said, and the warmth in her smile was entirely genuine. I would not ask you to abandon what you have built here, Issei. If anything, I intend to make certain it survives whatever Kokubile decides to send against it next. Kiba Yuto turned out to be a far more patient teacher than Issei expected, though no less demanding for the patients. Their first session took place in the school's old gymnasium after hours, borrowed with what Issei suspected was a considerable amount of quiet favor pulling on Rias's part, and consisted almost entirely of Issei being knocked flat onto training mats over and over while Kiba calmly explained, each time, exactly what he had done wrong. You are relying entirely on the gauntlet's raw strength, Kiba said, offering a hand to pull Issei back to his feet for what felt like the 20th time that evening. That will work, sometimes, against opponents who underestimate you the way those fallen angels did. It will not work against anyone who has actually studied how a boosted gear wielder fights. You need footwork. You need to understand distance. Strength without control is simply a larger target. Easy for you to say, Issei muttered, rubbing his shoulder where he had landed hard against the mat. You've probably been doing this since you could walk. I have been doing this since I had very little else, Kiba said, and something quieter passed behind his easy smile, old enough and private enough that Issei did not press further. But that is exactly why I know the shortcuts do not exist. There is no version of this where you skip the part where you fall down a great many times before you stop falling. Issei fell down a great many times. Over the following 2 weeks, his evenings split evenly between the ruined annex and increasingly grueling training sessions with Rias's peerage, and by the end of most nights he collapsed into bed with muscles aching in ways that made even climbing the stairs to his own bedroom feel like a genuine accomplishment. Kiba drilled him relentlessly on footwork and distance, correcting his stance with the patient, exacting precision of someone who had clearly survived a great many fights he should not have. Akino, in turn, taught him to channel the raw surge of the boosted gear's power into something more controlled than the desperate, instinctive burst that had shattered the fallen angel's twin spears 3 weeks earlier, teaching him to feel the boundary between necessary force and reckless overextension. You keep pushing past your limit before you understand where your limit actually is, she observed one evening, watching him stagger through a series of controlled boosts, sweat soaking through his shirt, breath ragged. That will get you killed eventually, Issei, however much raw power the gauntlet grants you. Power without awareness is simply a faster way to exhaust yourself before the fight that actually matters. How do I fix that? Issei asked, bent over with his hands braced on his knees. Slowly, Akino said, not unkindly. The same way you fixed everything else in that ruined building of yours. One patient, deliberate step at a time. It was, Issei reflected during the rare quiet moments between training sessions, an oddly familiar rhythm, not so different from the patient work of coaxing frightened spirits out of hiding, just applied now to himself instead. He was learning, slowly and often painfully, to trust his own instincts the same careful way he had once learned to earn Hikari's trust, one small, deliberate victory building steadily toward the next. You are improving faster than most vessels I have known, Drake observed one particularly grueling evening, as Issei lay flat on his back on the gymnasium mats, too exhausted to immediately push himself back up. Though I suspect that has considerably more to do with the stubbornness you have already demonstrated protecting your annex than with any particular natural gift for combat. Is that supposed to be encouraging? Issei groaned. It is simply true. Stubbornness, properly channeled, has carried a great many wielders further than raw talent ever managed on its own. You would be wise not to underestimate how much that stubbornness is already worth, partner. Issei returned to the annex most evenings still aching from training, but found, each time, that the quiet, patient work waiting for him there steadied something in him that the grueling sessions with Rias's peerage could not quite reach on their own. Hikari greeted him without fail, warm and unbothered by his exhaustion. The construct, whom Issei had finally begun calling ashen for the scorched color of its plating, had taken to standing a silent, watchful post whenever Issei trained alone in the assembly hall, offering nothing more than its steady presence, which somehow, quietly, helped anyway. The warden watched Issei's progress with careful, approving attention, though he never let the growing strength go entirely without caution. You are becoming formidable, the ancient guardian said one evening, watching Issei run through a series of drills Kiba had assigned for independent practice. But formidable is not the same as ready, boy. Kokabile has survived centuries of far more experienced opponents than you currently are. Strength alone, however rapidly it grows, will not be enough if he decides to move against this place with his full weight behind him. So what will be enough? Issei asked, pausing mid-drill, sweat dripping from his chin. I do not fully know yet, the warden admitted, with an honesty Issei had come to deeply value even when the truth was uncomfortable. But I suspect the answer lies less in how hard you can strike, and more in how well you have learned to stand beside others who are willing to strike alongside you. Power that stands entirely alone has broken against Kokabile before, across many ages. Power that stands bound to genuine loyalty, freely given, has occasionally, rarely, managed to hold. Issei thought of Rias's steady offer of alliance, still gently waiting for his final answer, and of the small, patchwork family gathered in the ruined hall behind him, and of Kiba and Akino's patient, demanding training, freely given without any hidden price attached. He was beginning, slowly, to understand exactly what the warden meant. The second attack came without warning, exactly as Sona had predicted it would, on an evening Issei had almost allowed himself to relax. He was in the assembly hall, running through the footwork drills Kiba had assigned, Hikari watching from her nest of blankets with lazy, contented interest, when the warden went suddenly rigid, ember eyes snapping toward the broken ceiling with an intensity Issei had learned, over the past weeks, never to ignore. Multiple presences, the warden said, low and urgent. Considerably more than 3 this time. Approaching quickly. Issei's stomach dropped, months of careful, patient preparation suddenly compressed into a single, racing heartbeat. How many? 8. Perhaps 9. The warden was already moving toward the entrance, massive form settling into a braced, defensive stance Issei had come to recognize from their sparring sessions these past weeks. This is no scouting party, boy. This is a deliberate test of your defenses, and likely a message to whoever is watching, that Kokabile does not intend to wait much longer. Ashen emerged from the ruined chapel at a controlled, deliberate pace, taking up position near the entrance without needing to be told, and the small cluster of will-o'-the-wisps scattered instinctively toward the darker corners of the hall. Frightened but no longer, Issei noted with a fierce flare of pride, fleeing the building entirely the way they might have weeks earlier. Call Rias, Issei said, already reaching for the phone in his pocket. Tell her what's happening. I'll hold until she gets here. You intend to fight 8 opponents alone? The warden's tone carried sharp disapproval. Not alone. Issei's hand flared with familiar warmth as the boosted gear began, instinctively, to manifest along his forearm. I've got you. I've got Ashen. And I've spent 2 weeks learning exactly how not to get myself killed doing this. I'm not going to just sit here and wait for backup while they tear this place apart. The warden studied him for a long moment, ember eyes weighing the boy standing before him against the frightened, uncertain child who had first stumbled into this ruined hall weeks earlier, and found, apparently, something considerably steadier looking back. Then we hold together, the warden said finally. As we should have from the beginning. The first wave of fallen angels breached the outer wall moments later, considerably more coordinated than the previous attackers had been, spreading immediately into a loose formation that made clear this was, exactly as the warden had warned, a deliberate test rather than a desperate grab. Their leader, a lean, scarred woman with cold, assessing eyes, surveyed the ruined hall with clinical interest before her gaze settled on Issei. So this is the vessel causing Lord Kokabile so much interest, she said. I confess I expected something more impressive than a teenager and a broken relic. You're welcome to find out how impressive we actually are, Issei said, and felt, with some surprise, that his voice did not waver at all. The fight that followed tested every hour of his grueling training in ways the previous encounter never had. Issei moved with considerably more discipline than before. Footwork careful and deliberate the way Kiba had drilled into him, boosts measured and controlled rather than desperate, and reckless the way Akino had spent 2 weeks correcting. He fought alongside the warden and Ashen rather than hiding behind them, each of them covering gaps the others could not, a coordinated defense that would have been impossible weeks earlier. It was still, unmistakably, the hardest fight of his life. A fallen angel's spear grazed his shoulder before he managed to twist clear, hot pain lancing down his arm, and another nearly caught him from behind before Ashen's massive form intercepted the blow with a grinding, metallic shriek of effort. Issei felt himself flagging, the sustained effort of holding against 8 coordinated opponents draining him faster than any single training session ever had, and understood, with grim clarity, exactly what the warden had meant weeks earlier about strength alone not being enough. Then, cutting sharply through the chaos, crimson light bloomed suddenly near the shattered outer wall, and Rias Gremory stepped through the breach with her entire peerage array behind her, expression set in the same cold, focused determination Issei had seen the night she first fought to protect him. "That is quite enough," Rias said, and the sheer, unmistakable authority in her voice made even the scarred fallen angel leader falter, just slightly. "You are trespassing against a steward under my protection, and I have grown considerably less patient with these repeated incursions than I was 3 weeks ago." The tide of the fight shifted decisively the moment Rias's peerage joined it, Kiba's blade a blur of controlled, disciplined violence, Akino's lightning arcing across the ruined hall with devastating precision, Kaniko's raw physical strength sending fallen angels tumbling with blows that belied her small frame entirely. The scarred leader, recognizing quickly that the numbers had shifted decisively against her, called a hasty retreat, her remaining forces scattering back through the shattered wall into the darkness beyond. Issei sank to one knee amid the settling dust, breathing hard, shoulder throbbing where the spear had grazed it, and felt, beneath the exhaustion, something fiercely, unmistakably proud. "You held," Rias said, crossing to kneel beside him, already summoning healing magic to her palms. 8 opponents, and you held this place until we arrived. That is no small thing, Issei. Barely, Issei admitted, wincing as her healing magic settled warm over the wound on his shoulder. "I don't think I could have done that without everything Kiba and Akino taught me these past 2 weeks. Then it seems the training has already justified itself." Rias's expression sobered, the brief warmth giving way to something more serious. "But Issei, listen carefully. 8 fallen angels sent as a deliberate test means Kokabeel is done merely probing your defenses. Whatever comes next, I do not believe it will be a fight you can survive with training alone." Issei looked around the ruined hall, at the damage the fight had left behind, at Hikari creeping cautiously out from her hiding place now that the danger had passed, at Ashen still standing watchful guard despite visible news scoring along its scorched plating, and felt the last of his hesitation about Rias's earlier offer finally, quietly settle into certainty. "Then maybe it's time I stopped trying to figure this out alone," he said. "Rias, I want to talk about that alliance." They spoke properly the following evening, in the relative calm of the school's occult research clubroom rather than amid the wreckage of a fresh attack, Issei seated across from Rias with the warden standing quiet and watchful near the door, having insisted, gently but firmly, on accompanying him for this particular conversation. "I want to be honest about what I'm asking for," Issei began, before Rias could speak, because he had spent most of the previous night lying awake rehearsing exactly this moment. "I'm not looking to join your peerage. I don't want to become a devil, or a pawn, or whatever the actual terms are. I want an alliance. Something where the annex stays mine to protect, on my terms, and where I help you if you need it, and you help me if I need it, but neither of us owns the other." Rias studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful and faintly pleased crossing her expression. "That is, almost precisely, the arrangement I intended to offer, if I am honest. I have never had any interest in claiming what you have built as spoils, Issei. What I want is a genuine partner in maintaining this town's safety, not another piece added to a collection." "Okay." Issei exhaled, some of the tension he had been carrying easing slightly. "Then I think I can agree to that. But I have conditions." "I am listening." "The annex stays independent. Whatever happens, whoever else shows up wanting to claim it, it doesn't become Gremory territory just because we're allies. It stays neutral ground, exactly the way the warden always meant it to be." Issei glanced toward the ancient guardian near the door, who inclined his head slightly in silent approval. "And everyone there, Hikari, Ashen, all of them, they're not bargaining chips in this. If something ever happened where helping you meant putting them at risk without their say in it, I need to know I can say no." "Agreed," without hesitation, Rias said. I would think considerably less of myself, and of you, if either of us treated the people under our protection as currency to be spent. And I keep training with your peerage, but it doesn't turn into some kind of debt I have to keep paying off forever. It's an alliance, not a favor I owe you indefinitely. Rias's smile widened, something genuinely warm beneath the formal negotiation. Issei, I would remind you that Kiba and Akino have both told me, more than once this past week, how much they have enjoyed training you. You are not a burden being tolerated. You are, if I may say so, precisely the kind of ally I hoped this town would eventually produce. Issei felt heat rise faintly in his cheeks at that, unprepared for the sincerity in it, and cleared his throat before continuing. Okay. Then I think yeah? I want to agree to this. An alliance, on those terms? Rias rose from her seat and extended her hand across the low table between them, formal and deliberate in a way that made the moment feel, appropriately, like something significant. Then let us make it official, Issei Hyoudou. An alliance between the Gremory House and the independent territory of the Annex, freely entered, freely maintained, and freely ended by either party should it ever cease to serve us both. Issei shook her hand, feeling something settle into place that carried none of the uncertainty he had braced himself for, only a quiet, steady rightness. Well done, partner, Drake rumbled approvingly from behind his ribs. I have watched a great many wielders across a great many centuries make this exact choice poorly, either surrendering everything for the promise of safety, or refusing all alliance out of stubborn pride until it costs them everything regardless. You have found, I think, the harder and considerably wiser path between those two extremes. The warden, watching from near the door, allowed himself something close to a genuine, ancient smile. This is precisely the arrangement the old law of this place was meant to protect, boy. Neutral ground, freely allied rather than claimed. I did not expect to see it honored so faithfully, this soon into your path as steward. I had good teachers, Issei said, glancing between the warden and Rias both, and meant it entirely. The formal alliance settled, quietly but significantly, into place over the following days, word of it spreading carefully through the more discreet channels of the supernatural community that monitored Ko Town's shifting balance of power. Sona expressed quiet, professional approval when informed. Kiba and Akino, already invested in Issei's training, seemed genuinely pleased that the arrangement had become official rather than simply implied. But far beyond the town's borders, in whatever cold, calculating place Kokabio plotted his next move, the news of a formal alliance between the rogue dragon vessel and the Gremory heiress did not arrive as a deterrent. It arrived, instead, as confirmation that the boy had become exactly the kind of consolidated threat worth eliminating decisively, before his growing web of alliances could grow any stronger, and any more difficult to unravel. Sona arrived at the clubroom 4 days later without her usual composed calm fully intact, a folder of gathered intelligence clutched tightly in one hand, and the moment Rias saw her expression, she rose immediately from her seat. Tell me, Rias said simply. Kokabile is mobilizing, Sona said, spreading a hastily assembled set of notes across the low table. Not scouts, not a testing force. My contacts within the Fallen Angel faction who still owe me favors report movement of considerably larger numbers toward this region, consistent with a full offensive rather than another probing attack. Issei, seated nearby after another exhausting training session, felt his stomach drop. How large is considerably larger? Estimates vary, Sona admitted, but the lowest credible number I have received puts it well beyond anything either of our combined peerages could hope to withstand alone, let alone the additional forces you have gathered at the Annex. This is no longer a matter of testing your defenses, Hyoudou. Kokabile intends to end this decisively, and soon. The room fell into heavy, tense silence, broken finally by Akino's quiet, pointed question. Why now? He's had weeks to move against Issei more aggressively. Why commit fully at this exact moment? Because we allied, Rias said grimly, the pieces settling into place with dawning, uncomfortable clarity. A rogue, unaffiliated vessel was a problem Kokabile could address at his leisure. A vessel formally allied with an established devil house, backed by growing strength and a defensible position, is a problem that only grows more difficult the longer he waits. We forced his hand, in a sense, simply by making the alliance official. Issei absorbed that with a heavy, sinking feeling, the quiet satisfaction of the past several days curdling rapidly into fresh, urgent dread. So this is my fault. If I hadn't agreed to the alliance. No, the warden said firmly, before anyone else could respond, his rough voice cutting decisively through the beginning spiral of Issei's guilt. Do not mistake the timing of Kokabil's decision for the cause of it, boy. He was always going to move against you eventually. The alliance did not create this danger. It simply ensured you would not face it standing entirely alone, which is precisely why it was the right choice regardless of what comes next. Rias nodded firmly in agreement, crossing to stand beside Issei with a steadying hand briefly resting on his shoulder. The warden is right. Whatever timeline Kokabil had originally planned, this confrontation was always coming. The only real question now is whether we face it prepared, together, or scattered and unprepared the way you nearly were 3 weeks ago. How much time do we have? Kiba asked, already mentally cataloging, Issei suspected, exactly what additional preparation might still be possible. Sona consulted her notes grimly. Days at most. Perhaps as few as 2 or 3, if my sources' estimates hold true. The weight of that settled heavily over the clubroom, every face present shifting into focused, urgent calculation. Issei felt Drake stir behind his ribs, a low, steady presence gathering itself for whatever came next, and thought of the warden's words weeks earlier about power that stood bound to genuine loyalty occasionally, rarely, managing to hold against odds that should have broken it entirely. Then we use every hour we have, Rias said, straightening with the crisp, decisive authority of someone already 3 steps ahead in planning. Sona, I need everything your contacts can gather on troop composition and likely approach routes. Kiba, Akino, intensify Issei's training, focus specifically on coordinated combat rather than individual technique. We will not be facing this alone and he needs to fight like it. Issei. She turned to him directly, her expression softening only slightly beneath the urgent focus. I need you to prepare the annex, and everyone within it, for the possibility that this fight may come directly to your doorstep. Whatever defenses the warden can help you raise, whatever precautions can be taken to protect those who cannot fight, now is the time to put them in place. Issei nodded, feeling the familiar, steadying warmth of purpose settle over the fear, the same quiet resolve that had carried him through every difficult choice these past weeks. Okay, he said. Then let's get to work. We've got 2 days, maybe 3. Let's make sure Kokabil regrets choosing to spend them on us. Outside the clubroom's tall windows, the evening settled slowly into darkness over Ko Town, ordinary and unaware, while beneath its quiet streets an alliance of devils, an ancient guardian, and a boy who had never asked for any of this began, together, the urgent work of preparing to defend everything they had built against the storm that had, at long last, finally begun to break. The 2 days Sona had warned them about passed in a blur of urgent, focused preparation, and by the evening of the 3rd, Issei stood in the center of the assembly hall and barely recognized the place he had first stumbled into weeks earlier. The warden had spent the better part of both days redrawing old wards into the stone floor around the building's perimeter, ancient symbols traced carefully with a mixture of chalk and something darker that Issei had not asked too many questions about, each one designed to slow, if not entirely stop, anyone attempting to breach the annex's boundaries by force. Ashen had taken up a permanent post near the main entrance, plating polished and reinforced as best they could manage with the limited materials available, standing sentinel with a stillness that Issei had come to find deeply reassuring rather than unsettling. Rias's peerage had contributed what they could as well. Kiba had walked the grounds twice, marking defensible choke points with the practiced eye of someone who had clearly survived more sieges than he ever spoke about directly. Akino had helped reinforce the wards with her own considerable command of elemental magic, weaving crackling threads of latent lightning into the old stone that would, if triggered by precious seconds against any force attempting to force its way through. This is as ready as we can make it, Rias said, standing beside Issei in the fading evening light, surveying the reinforced hall with a critical, assessing eye. I wish I could tell you it would be enough. Kokabil's numbers, if Sona's intelligence holds, will still considerably outmatch what we can field directly. But we're not facing him with nothing, Issei said, more to steady himself than to correct her. We've got wards, we've got Ashen, We've got everyone here who's spent weeks learning to fight beside each other instead of just next to each other. That has to count for something. It does, Rias agreed. More than you may realize. I have seen larger forces broken by considerably less coordination than what you have built here, Issei. That is not empty reassurance. It is simply what experience has taught me. Issei walked the halls slowly that evening, checking on each of the annex's residents in turn, a habit that had become as natural to him now as breathing. Hikari pressed close against his leg, more subdued than usual, clearly sensing the tension gathering in the air around her. The wisps had clustered tightly together near the ceiling, their soft glow dimmed with anxious uncertainty. Even the Dar Garden spirit, rooted immovably in the courtyard, had offered him an unprompted third sentence that evening, gruff and simple, a promise that its roots would hold the ground beneath any who tried to cross them. He found Ashen last, standing its silent watch near the entrance, and settled beside it for a long, quiet moment before speaking. I know you can't really answer me, Issei said softly, but I wanted to say it anyway. Whatever happens tomorrow, or whenever they come, I'm glad I found you. I'm glad I didn't just walk away that first night when you raised your arm at me. Ashen's dim eye brightened faintly, and its massive, scorched hand lowered slowly to rest, with surprising gentleness, on Issei's shoulder, a silent, steady answer that needed no words at all. The warden found him there a short while later, and settled down beside him with the same careful, deliberate weight Issei had grown accustomed to over these past weeks. You are frightened, the warden observed, not unkindly. Terrified, Issei admitted. I keep telling everyone else it's going to be okay, but honestly, I have no idea if it actually will be. Good, the warden said, and at Issei's startled glance, continued more gently. Not the fear itself, but your honesty about it. I have known wardens across many ages who convinced themselves fear was a weakness to be hidden even from those they protected. It is not. It is simply the honest weight of caring deeply about what you stand to lose. I would trust a steward who feels that weight far more than one who claims to feel nothing at all. Issei looked out through the ruined hall's broken windows, at the darkening sky beyond, and thought of Kokobile somewhere out there, patient and ancient, and utterly convinced of his own inevitable victory. Do you think we can actually win this? He asked quietly. The warden was silent for a long moment, ember eyes fixed thoughtfully on the middle distance, weighing the question with the same careful honesty he had offered Issei from their very first conversation in this ruined hall. I do not know, he said finally. I have seen impossible odds broken by exactly the kind of loyalty you have built here, and I have seen equally impossible odds prove, in the end, simply impossible. What I know with certainty, boy, is that you have already accomplished something Kokobile did not account for when he first decided you were a threat worth eliminating. You have made yourself worth fighting for, to more people, and more things, than he understood was possible in so short a time. Issei let that settle over him, quiet and steadying, as the last light faded fully from the evening sky. Then I guess, he said finally, we'll find out tomorrow whether that's enough. Somewhere beyond the town's quiet, unaware streets, in the deep, gathering dark, the first ranks of Kokobile's assembled forces began, at long last, their slow, deliberate march toward Ko-town, and toward the small, fiercely defended ruin that had, against every expectation, refused to break. The attack came just before dawn, when the sky had begun to lighten into pale gray but the sun had not yet fully risen, and Issei woke to the warden's urgent voice cutting through the thin, uneasy sleep he had finally managed to find curled against the assembly hall's cold stone wall. They are here, the warden said, already rising to his full, imposing height, ember eyes burning bright with focused readiness. In numbers considerably larger than Sona's estimates suggested. Issei scrambled upright, heart already hammering, the boosted gear flaring instinctively to life along his forearm before his conscious mind had fully caught up with the danger. Hikari darted immediately for the reinforced alcove they had prepared for her and the other vulnerable spirits, ears flat with fear but movements quick and practiced from days of drilled preparation. Ashen took up its position at the entrance without needing to be told, plating gleaming faintly in the pale pre-dawn light. Through the broken windows, Issei could see them now, dark shapes descending from the lightning sky in numbers that made his breath catch, wings unfurled against the gray morning light, and at the center of the formation, unmistakable even from a distance, a figure who radiated a cold, ancient authority that made even the warden's massive form tense visibly beside him. "Kokabile," the warden said, low and grim. "He has come himself." That is either a considerable insult to how seriously he takes this threat, or a considerable compliment to how seriously he actually does. Issei's phone buzzed against his leg, a message from Rias arriving in short, urgent bursts. *, we see them. Moving now. Hold as long as you can, *. We're not waiting for backup to arrive before we start defending this place, Issei said, more to steady his own racing heart than to inform anyone who did not already understand. The wards first. Let's see what they're actually worth. The first wave of fallen angels struck the outer boundary of the annex grounds moments later, and the ancient wards the warden had spent 2 days carefully redrawing flared instantly to blazing, crimson life, a wall of raw resistance meeting the attackers head-on. Several were thrown back entirely, crying out in surprise at the force of the rebound. Others pressed harder, wings straining, until the wards began, slowly and audibly, to groan under the sustained assault. They will not hold indefinitely against this many, the warden warned, already moving toward the breach forming near the outer fence. We must be ready to meet whoever breaks through directly. Issei followed, the boosted gear pulsing steady and bright along his forearm, and felt, beneath the fear, the same fierce, steady resolve that had carried him through every difficult moment these past weeks. He was not the frightened boy who had first stumbled into this ruin. He would not face this fight as though he still were. The wards finally shattered under the combined weight of a dozen simultaneous strikes, crimson light scattering outward in a final, blinding flare, and the first fallen angels surged through the breach directly toward the assembly hall. Ashen met them first, massive form crashing into the lead attacker with a force that sent both crashing back through the broken outer wall entirely, the ancient construct's scorched plating absorbing blow after blow with a resilience that clearly startled the attackers expecting an easy path through. The warden moved beside it, ember eyes blazing, meeting spear and blade alike with the accumulated fury of centuries spent protecting exactly this kind of ground. Issei threw himself into the fight beside them, every hour of grueling training with Kiba and Akino finally paying its full, hard-earned dividend. His footwork held steady even under sustained pressure. His boosts came measured and controlled rather than desperate, each surge of power calculated rather than wasted. He fought not as an untrained boy overwhelmed by circumstance, but as a steward defending something he had built with his own 2 hands, and the difference showed in every blow he landed and every strike he turned aside. Still, the numbers pressed relentlessly, wave after wave of fallen angels pouring through the shattered boundary faster than even 3 defenders fighting at their absolute best could hope to fully contain. Issei, the warden called, breathing hard between exchanges, we cannot hold this pace indefinitely. We need Rias's peerage, and we need them soon. As if summoned by the words themselves, crimson light bloomed suddenly at the tree line beyond the annex's shattered fence, and Rias Gremory strode through it with her entire peerage array behind her, expression set in the same fierce, unwavering determination Issei had come to recognize as her truest self. Sorry we're late, she called, already summoning a blazing sphere of destruction to her open palm. Kiba, Akino, with me. Kaneko, cover the flank. Let's show Lord Kokabile exactly what happens when he underestimates the people willing to fight for this town. The tide of the battle shifted decisively with their arrival, Kiba's blade cutting through the disorganized ranks with disciplined precision, Akino's lightning arcing in devastating waves across the courtyard, Kaneko's raw strength scattering attackers who had clearly never expected to face resistance this coordinated from what they had assumed, only days earlier, would be an easy, decisive victory. But even as the first waves began to falter and scatter, the cold, ancient figure at the formation's center had not yet moved to join the fight at all. Kokabile simply watched, arms folded, dark eyes fixed with patient, unhurried interest on the boy fighting fiercely at the center of the defense, waiting, with the particular cruelty of something that had survived countless centuries of exactly this kind of confrontation, for the moment when watching alone would no longer be enough. Kokabile finally moved when the last of his scattered forces began retreating in earnest, unfolding his wings with slow, deliberate menace and stepping forward into the ruined courtyard with the unhurried confidence of something that had never once, in all his considerable years, doubted the outcome of a fight he had chosen to enter personally. Enough, he said, and though his voice was quiet, it carried across the entire battlefield with an authority that made even Rias's peerage falter, weapons still raised but attention now fixed warily on the ancient figure who had, at last, decided to participate directly. You have all performed admirably. It changes nothing. He raised one hand, almost casually, and a spear of black light condensed above his palm with a scale and density that dwarfed anything Issei had faced in every previous encounter combined, crackling with barely contained power that made the very air around it seem to bend and warp. Scatter, Rias called sharply, already summoning her own power to meet the threat, but Kokobil's spear was already moving, faster than anything Issei had witnessed, and it struck the ground near the center of the courtyard with an explosion that sent every combatant present sprawling, dust and debris raining down in a violent, deafening wave. Issei hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming, and pushed himself up in time to see Kokobil already closing the distance directly toward him, expression unreadable, dark eyes fixed with cold, patient interest on the crimson gauntlet still glowing faintly along Issei's trembling forearm. The boosted gear, Kokobil said, almost conversationally, as though the devastation around him were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It has been some time since I faced a wielder young enough to still believe raw courage alone could compensate for centuries of accumulated experience. I confess I find your persistence almost admirable, boy. Almost. Issei forced himself upright, every muscle screaming in protest, the boosted gear flaring instinctively brighter in response to the mounting danger. You're not taking this place, he said, voice rough but unbroken. You're not taking any of them. I have no particular interest in your ruined shelter, Kokobil said, almost dismissively, closing the remaining distance with unhurried, terrible confidence. I am interested only in ensuring that a rogue power capable of disrupting the current balance does not remain unclaimed, or worse, allied against my interests. Whether that requires your surrender, or your death, is, I confess, a matter of near total indifference to me. He struck again, faster than Issei's exhausted, battered body could fully track, and only the warden's sudden, desperate intervention, massive form throwing itself directly into the path of the blow, saved Issei from a strike that would have ended the fight entirely. The impact sent the warden crashing backward through the last standing section of the assembly hall's wall, ancient armor cracking audibly under the sheer force of the collision, and for one horrifying, suspended moment, the ancient guardian did not move at all. No, Issei breathed, horror flooding through the exhaustion and pain, and something in him, something that had been carefully building for weeks beneath every hour of patient, quiet work, finally broke free entirely. Partner, Drake's voice rose suddenly, urgent and vast, filling every corner of Issei's mind at once. I can feel it. The threshold. You have carried more than enough conviction to reach it, if you are willing to pay what it demands. What? Issei gasped, staggering upright despite every part of his battered body screaming for him to stay down. What threshold? What are you talking about? The balance breaker lies just beyond your current limit, partner. It will cost you dearly, strength drawn from your own life force rather than simply doubled from what already exists. But it may be the only strength remaining capable of matching what stands before you now. Issei looked at the warden's motionless form, at Ashen still fighting desperately against the last scattered remnants of Kokobil's broken forces, at Rias and her peerage struggling to rise from the devastation of Kokobil's single, casual strike, and felt every ounce of hesitation burn away entirely beneath a fury and determination that had nothing left in it of the frightened boy from weeks ago. Then let's pay it, Issei said, and raised his glowing, trembling fist toward the ancient fallen angel commander standing amid the wreckage of everything Issei had spent weeks so carefully building. Boost, he said, and this time the word did not simply ring through the ruined courtyard. It tore through it entirely, crimson light erupting outward in a wave that shook the very foundations of the broken ground beneath them, and Kokobil, for the first time since he had entered the fight, took an involuntary step backward, dark eyes widening with the first genuine flicker of surprise Issei had yet seen cross his ancient, calculating features. The power that flooded through Issei's body in that moment felt nothing like the familiar, doubling surge of an ordinary boost. It felt like standing at the center of a storm too vast for his own frame to properly contain, every nerve alight with raw, borrowed strength that pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat no longer entirely his own. Welsh Dragon, Balance Breaker, Drake's voice roared, no longer confined to Issei's mind alone but ringing out across the devastated courtyard for every combatant present to hear. The crimson gauntlet along Issei's forearm shifted and expanded, ancient scales spreading rapidly across his shoulder and down toward his chest, a brilliant green gem blazing to life at its center. And when Issei looked up at Kokubile through the sudden, overwhelming rush of power now coursing through him, he found, for the first time in the entire desperate fight, that the ancient fallen angel's cold confidence had finally, visibly cracked. Impossible, Kokubile murmured, taking another involuntary step back, dark eyes fixed on the pulsing scale armor now spreading across Issei's torso. A vessel this young should not be able to reach the balance breaker, not without years of disciplined training behind him. Maybe nobody told me that, Issei said, and his voice, filtered now through the armor's resonance, carried a weight and steadiness that had nothing left in it of fear. He moved before Kokubile could fully recover his composure, closing the distance between them with a speed that startled even Issei's own exhausted, battered body, and the first blow he landed against Kokubile's raised guard sent a shockwave rippling outward across the entire courtyard, throwing loose debris in every direction and cracking the ancient stone beneath both their feet. Kokubile staggered back, genuine alarm finally breaking through his centuries of practiced composure, and retaliated with a fresh spear of crackling black light, faster and larger than any he had thrown before. Issei met it head-on, crimson-armored fist closing around the weapon's shaft with a strength that should not have been possible, and with a single, decisive motion, shattered it entirely. "This ends now," Issei said, and struck again. The fight that followed bore no resemblance to the desperate, uncertain struggle of moments earlier. Issei moved with a fluid, overwhelming intensity that matched Kokubile blow for blow, each exchange shaking the ruined courtyard with the sheer force behind it, and slowly, unmistakably, the balance of the fight began, for the first time since Kokubile's arrival, to shift. Behind him, Issei was distantly, desperately aware of movement, the warden stirring painfully from the rubble where Kokubile's earlier blow had thrown him, ashen turning from the last scattered remnants of the retreating fallen angel forces to lend what strength it had left to the fight against their true commander. Rias, recovering from the devastation of Kokubile's opening strike, rose with fierce, renewed determination, crimson power already gathering once more in her open palm. Together, Rias called, and her peerage answered without hesitation, converging on the fight with disciplined, coordinated precision even as Issei continued pressing his own advantage against Kokubile's staggered, increasingly desperate defense. Kokubile, faced now with the combined force of an armored, balance-broken dragon vessel and an entire devil peerage fighting in perfect, hard-won coordination, found himself, for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, genuinely, uncomfortably outmatched. This was not supposed to happen, he said, retreating another step, wings flaring in preparation for a hasty escape that his pride clearly, visibly resisted even as tactical necessity demanded it. A single boy, barely a month into carrying his power, should not be capable of this. "I'm not just a boy fighting alone," Issei said, lowering his armored fist but not his guard, breathing hard beneath the crimson scales still humming with borrowed, overwhelming strength. "I've got a warden who taught me what it means to protect something properly. I've got friends who taught me how to actually fight instead of just surviving. And I've got an entire place full of people who believed in me before I even believed in myself. You never had a chance against all of that, not really. You just didn't know it yet." Kokubile studied him for a long, tense moment, calculation warring visibly with wounded, ancient pride, before finally, grudgingly, pragmatism won out entirely. "This is not finished," he said, wings spreading fully now in clear preparation for retreat. "But I will grant you this much, boy. You have earned a reprieve I did not intend to offer when I marched here tonight." He vanished into the lightning dawn sky before anyone could move to stop him, the last scattered remnants of his broken forces following swiftly behind, and the ruined courtyard fell, at last, into a heavy, exhausted, disbelieving silence. Issei's armor receded slowly from his shoulders and chest, the overwhelming rush of borrowed power fading back into the familiar warmth of the gauntlet alone, and the moment it did, every ounce of exhaustion he had been holding at bay crashed over him at once, sending him crumpling to his knees amid the wreckage of the fight. Issei. Rias was at his side in an instant, healing magic already gathering warm and urgent in her palms. You held. You actually held against Kokabile himself. Barely, Issei managed, vision swimming, the world tilting dangerously around him even as relief and disbelief warred fiercely with his fading strength. Is everyone okay? Everyone is alive, Rias said firmly, and behind her, Issei could see the warden rising slowly, painfully, but unmistakably upright, Ashen standing battered but steady near the shattered entrance, and Hikari already darting frantically across the wreckage toward him, small and desperate and entirely, gratefully whole. Then it was worth it, Issei said, and let the darkness finally, gratefully, claim him. Issei woke 2 days later in his own bed, sunlight streaming warm through his bedroom curtains, his body aching in ways that reminded him, with each careful movement, of exactly how close the fight had come to ending very differently. His mother, he learned from a hastily scrawled note on his nightstand, had been told he'd collapsed from exhaustion after an unusually demanding week of school activities, a lie smoothed over, he suspected, by considerably more supernatural intervention than his mother would ever knowingly accept. He found Rias waiting in the kitchen when he finally made his way downstairs, seated calmly at the table as though visiting his home were the most ordinary thing in the world, a cup of tea steaming gently in front of her. Your mother let me in, she explained, at his startled expression. I told her I was a classmate checking on your recovery. She seems very fond of you, Issei. She's the only person in my life who still thinks I have a completely normal one, Issei said, easing carefully into the chair across from her, muscles protesting every motion. How is everyone? The warden, Ashen, Hikari? Recovering, all of them, though the warden insists he requires considerably less rest than the rest of us are pushing on him. Rias's smile carried genuine warmth beneath its usual composed formality. Ashen has apparently taken to standing guard over the annex around the clock despite Kiba's repeated insistence that a brief rest would not constitute abandoning its post. And Hikari has refused to leave the assembly hall's entrance since the fight ended, apparently determined to be the first to greet you the moment you return. Issei felt something warm and grateful settle in his chest at that, cutting gently through the lingering ache of exhaustion. And Kokabile? Is he really gone? Or is this just a pause before he comes back with an even bigger force? Rias's expression sobered slightly, though the underlying confidence remained steady. Sona's intelligence suggests he has withdrawn considerably further than a simple tactical retreat would require, likely reassessing his position after a defeat that publicly, embarrassingly exceeded his expectations. I do not believe this is entirely over, Issei. Beings like Kokabile rarely forgive being outmatched by someone they dismiss so completely. But I also do not believe he will move against us again carelessly, not after what happened at the annex. So we won. We won, Rias confirmed, though I would gently point out that the victory belonged to considerably more than just you, however remarkable your balance breaker was. It belonged to the warden, to Ashen, to every hour you spent training, and to an alliance built on genuine trust rather than convenient necessity. That is, I think, precisely why it held when it mattered most. Issei thought of that, quietly, turning the words over as he sipped at the tea Rias had apparently poured for him as well, and felt something settle into place that had been slowly, steadily building since that first terrifying night in the ruined chapel weeks earlier. He returned to the annex that evening, still moving carefully but unwilling to let even his own recovery keep him away any longer, and found exactly the welcome Rias had described waiting for him. Hikari bounded across the courtyard the instant she caught sight of him, nearly bowling him over with the force of her relief. Ashen inclined its scorched, battered head in unmistakable, silent greeting. Even the Dargarden spirit offered him, unprompted, a full 4 sentences of gruff, heartfelt welcome, the most it had ever spoken at once in all the weeks Issei had known it. The warden waited for him near the stone circle at the assembly hall's center, ember eyes carrying a warmth and pride that needed no further words to fully convey. You did well, boy, the warden said simply. Better than I dared believe possible, this early into your path as steward. I couldn't have done it without you, Issei said. Any of you? I keep thinking about what you said back at the start of all this. About it not being about how hard I can strike alone. And what have you concluded? The warden asked, though something in his rough voice suggested he already suspected the answer. Issei looked around the ruined hall, patched now with careful repairs and reinforced wards, filled with the quiet, steady presence of everyone he had spent weeks so patiently gathering, and felt the last uncertain edges of the frightened boy who had first stumbled into this place finally, fully settle into something steadier, something that felt, at long last, entirely his own. That I was never actually alone to begin with, he said. Not since the very first night, when you told me I could still walk away and choose not to be the warden's steward, and I chose to stay anyway. The warden's ancient, weathered face shifted into something that might, in a face capable of fuller expression, have been called a genuine, proud smile. Then perhaps, he said quietly, it is time we stopped calling this place merely a shelter for the forgotten, and started calling it what it has truly become. A home, freely chosen, and fiercely defended by everyone within it. Outside, beyond the annex's reinforced walls, the evening settled peacefully over Ko Town, unaware of how close it had come to a very different fate, while within, a boy who had never asked for any of this stood surrounded by the strange, patchwork family he had built from nothing but patience and quiet, stubborn kindness, and understood, at last, exactly what it meant to be worth fighting for. Thanks for listening.